Good morning, colleagues. Please take your place, take your seat. Welcome for this second day of our conference here in the Parliament House of the Swiss Parliament. We hope you had an interesting and fruitful first day of talks yesterday, and we also hope that you had a nice evening with us celebrating the 60th anniversary of the accession of Switzerland to the Council of Europe yesterday evening. We were very honored to also have the presence of not only the President of the Parliamentary Assembly and the representative of the Swiss Parliament, the highest representative of the Swiss Parliament, but also the President of the Swiss Confederation, who will be also in Reykjavik for the summit in some days, and the Deputy Secretary General of the Council of Europe, our dear friend Björn Berge, who honored us with his presence yesterday evening and today. And he will give us, hopefully, an insight on the preparation of the summit and the link that our discussions here in Bern about democracy, actually, and an important point in the democratic procedure. As someone said yesterday, it's democracy is not only election, but without elections you cannot have a democracy. How can this element actually influence also the discussion on the future priorities of the Council of Europe that our head of state and government will have in Reykjavik? How can our discussions influence this declaration or these elements that will come out of this meeting next week in Reykjavik? And Reykjavik is interesting per se, but it's a starting point, or it's a moment in the history. What's interesting, it's what comes out of our discussion and of this summit, what we can do in the Council of Europe, but also in other organizations with these elements. So it's a path, it's a way, and there are important moments in this way. And we are very glad to have you today with us, dear Björn, and we will be very much looking forward to hearing from you about these elements of organizing election in times of crisis, and this link with the Reykjavik summit. Thank you very much for being with her, and you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Damien, and a very good morning to all of you. It is really a pleasure to be here today. This conference is both timely and important. Democracies require a lot more than elections to be worthy of the name, but it is equally true that without elections, there is no chance for democracy at all. Through free and fair voting, we choose our representatives, our leaders, and express our views about how our communities, our countries should be run. They are gateways to good democratic governance, and we must be alert and guard and protect against actions and circumstances that might undermine our democracies. This is especially important when we know that the overall trend of participation in voting is going downwards. True, in the last year there has been a small increase in the participation in election in certain countries. Perhaps it's because of Russia's appalling and completely unacceptable war against Ukraine, and a need for people to again make their voices heard loud and clear. But even so, this increase is small and voter turnout remains lower than in years. So you are indeed right to use this conference to consider how we should navigate these troubled waters, to do what we can to ensure open, accessible and regular elections, even in crisis situations, be it the pandemic like the COVID-19, natural disasters, or for that matter during war and armed conflicts. We also need to focus on the challenges posed by digital technology. which I know you will discuss this morning, and that have the potential both to help and to hinder electoral processes. It is certainly true, as you have heard from a range of distinguished panelists, that the Council of Europe's work supports national authorities in these and in a number of other areas related to elections. From the standard setting that begins with the right to free elections, guaranteed by Article 3 of the first protocol to the European Convention on Human Rights, and which has been further elaborated by the European Court of Human Rights and the Committee of Ministers over the years, going all the way to the legal expertise, the election observation and technical cooperation provided by the Venice Commission, the Congress of Local and Regional Authorities, and last but not least, the Parliamentary Assembly, which also has such a prominent role in election observation. Overall, what we have achieved in Europe in terms of building democracies and respecting the rights enshrined in the European Convention on Human Rights is quite impressive. No other continent has this level of protection for safeguarding the fundamental rights of its citizens and high standards of democracy and rule of law. But we must never take it for granted. Next week, as you mentioned, Damien, European leaders will gather in Iceland for the Council of Europe's 4th summit of heads of state and government. There, they will be invited to recommit to the values and standards of our organization, including the Reykjavik principles for democracy. Foremost among these should be the commitment to actively enable and encourage the democratic participation of every citizen through regular, free and fair elections, and to hold elections and referenda in accordance with international standards, and to take all possible measures to ensure that there is no undue interference in electoral systems and processes. So the issues on your agenda today, how to live up to those words in the most difficult of situations, in times of crises, could not be more pertinent. But this alone will not be enough. After all, if pioneering election standards and first-class monitoring are all that is required, why has voter turnout fallen? Why do more young people across Europe express disillusionment and tell opinion pollsters that they do not consider living in a democracy to be important? Why is there a democratic crisis, a democratic backsliding in Europe today? And what can we do about it in concrete terms? These are all important questions and deserves our reflection. And it's not easy to find appropriate replies to them, but it is essential that our leaders address them, that we discuss them. I believe we need to re-engage with our citizens, young people in particular, and make them feel that their votes, their participations, their voices are important and lead to real change. But that is a hard case to make in some European countries at a time when freedom of expression is being undermined with rising numbers of attacks on journalists, including murders. It is difficult to sell when civic space is shrinking and freedom of assembly and associations are being restricted, and legitimate protest stopped by politicians with bad intentions. And it's a tricky argument to make to young people when they are struggling with higher costs of living and have a hard time finding a job, while watching as the quality of their health, education, and other public services continues to decline. That major challenges such as climate change are not properly addressed, and inequality within their societies becomes even greater, while corruption remains deep-rooted. This is the sad reality for many Europeans right now. So when our leaders meet in Reykjavik next week, their commitment needs to go beyond elections, vital though that they certainly are, and all the way to reassembling the very core building blocks of democracy, rule of law and respect for human rights, on which peace and security, our dignity and equality depend. It is a matter of leadership, of setting the right political priorities. And in some way, we must reconnect the act of voting to the path of democratic progress in the interest of every European. Let me end by thanking the Parliamentary Assembly and the Swiss authorities for their commitment to that pathway, as demonstrated by this conference, and the determination of everyone here to ensure that the first act of democratic participation remains free, safe and secure elections, however challenging the circumstances we face. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Mr. Deputy Secretary General, dear Björn, for this wise word, and I hope our leaders gathering in the next days already in Reykjavik will also listen to this wise perspective, also to find a way to connect more with young people and bring them also in the democratic process. Thank you very much, and it was a pleasure and an honor to have you today in this conference, and we will now continue with the next panel under the chairpersonship of our dear colleague Suna Evarsdottir. Thank you very much once again.
Thank you, Damian, and thank you, dear colleagues, friends. Electronic voting, artificial intelligence, and cybersecurity are the topics under the discussion right now. Yesterday, we had the challenging project to discuss how to tackle the obstacles, the threats, and the challenges that come with natural disasters, pandemics, and war in relation to the safety and security of free democratic elections. Today, I have the honor to discuss perhaps a more two-sided challenge, but yet opportunity when it comes to free and democratic and fair elections. Just like any tool, artificial intelligence and cyber technology can be used both for good and for bad. And it is our job here today in two panels to discuss both the threats and challenges that we face because of the rise of AI and the use of electronic voting, and of course the threats towards the cybersecurity when it comes to elections, but also the opportunities for more inclusiveness, for advancement in democratic technology, and for better access of all to the voting and democratic process. So, what are these threats? How do we tackle these challenges? It'll be our project today to discuss these things. As a politician, perhaps what I find most interesting and important is the integrity of the vote. Now, we can approach the integrity of the vote in many different ways. How true, how democratic, how fair is the democratic debate before an election? And how far can it be influenced by ever more sophisticated technology that can fabricate opinions, that can fabricate people that have opinions that don't even exist, that can magnify the voice of a tiny minority to look like it is a big majority in society? This is something that social media bots are now able to do in a very convincing way. Something that they didn't used to be able to convince us at all, because they didn't have a profile picture, they didn't have any friends, but now they look very real. And they even use faces that we can't track down because they've been generated by artificial intelligence. And turning to another artificial intelligence threat, of course, are deep fakes and their increased sophistication. And of course, therefore, their potential to skew debate and spread disinformation. These are all challenges that we face when it comes to educating our population, when it comes to increasing media literacy. But perhaps for me, the biggest question is, how do we authenticate information received now that it can so easily be forged? Nevertheless, access to e-voting, should we gain the public's trust, should we use the right equipment and tools, could help us overcome the challenges that we face when it comes to natural disasters, pandemics, or war, so that everybody can have access to the democratic process despite difficulties on the ground. So, as an opening, hopefully for both of these sessions, but I'll have a little bit more to add later, I'd like to introduce our distinguished panelists at the first session. I have on my left Thomas Schneider, Head of International Affairs in the Federal Office of Communication in Switzerland, and the President of the Committee on Artificial Intelligence of the Council of Europe. David Ire, Head of Swiss Delegation to the Congress of, and Minister for Environment for the Canton of Jura, spokesperson for the Congress on Artificial Intelligence and Digitalization, on my right. And here at the end of the panel, so that we're a good gender mix here, I have Julia Speicher, researcher on digitalization of public administration at the University of Bern. I welcome you all, and I start by giving you the floor. Thomas, please.
Thank you, Suna, and I'm very honored to be here with you. It was already a very interesting day yesterday. I hope we can keep up with the quality of the discussions. Already in 2019, 2020, one committee of the Council of Europe, then through the Committee of Ministers, issued a declaration on the manipulative capacities of algorithmic systems, as the declaration was called. But of course, manipulation, or if you want to call it neutral influence of political processes, is nothing new. Throughout history, even before our countries were democracies, powers and those seeking powers have always tried to gain influence, to manipulate people in order to get their support. And these attempts, as soon as outlined, have not only targeted the decision process itself, the elections or the votes, but of course the phase before, the shaping of public opinion, of people's opinion, and also the phase after, i.e. the implementation or the avoidance of implementing a decision. And in the past, also new technologies have presented new opportunities, but new risks. The printing press already has created fake news. It has allowed also to dismantle fake news that were told to the people by the churches, but the printing press has also inspired people to go to war at each other based on false information. Same with radio, when Bertolt Brecht was hoping that this would democratize the public sphere. Others, unfortunately, and we have enough witnesses in the last century from the Nazis, but also in the Balkan Wars, how radio can be used to manipulate and incite people to go against each other. The same with television, the same also with internet, even before what we now call AI has been used massively. So this is nothing new per se, but of course there are new elements that we witnessed, and Suna has already mentioned a few of them. What we did with every technology, we developed over time a quite sophisticated system of regulation, laws, media laws, election laws, and so on and so forth. And we developed a societal consensus that goes beyond mere laws and technical standards, is about the importance of all these processes. And I think this is something that we should focus, in addition to the legal and the technical side also, and it has been mentioned already yesterday, the societal value that people need to want to fight for these systems to work. With regard to AI, as Suna has said, we have new forms, of course, of manipulation in the election process itself. I'm basically looking very much into the phase before, i.e. the political opinion shaping, where we have ways to influence the opinion shaping like we've never had before, through creating fake content, through creating fake groups of people that seem to be real and seem to be relevant, although they may not exist or maybe just a small minority. This is something that is also not new per se, but it's new in this form of appearance, in this convincing form of appearance. We have the problem that what we used to take as proofs, images, audio, visual material, can be increasingly faked in a way that we have to question to what extent, how we use proofs. What is a proof for something or against something, given that everything can be faked fairly convincingly as well. So there are a number of questions that we need to find the answers, which is a discussion that is ongoing. We have new gatekeepers that have come in. Well, again, we also had gatekeepers throughout the time. We had newspapers, we had television stations, radio stations that acted as gatekeepers. Now we have, on the one side, the democratization of access to media, but we also have new gatekeepers in the form, particularly of social media, but also other platforms that may have roles and responsibilities that may need to be defined more precisely in order to keep these checks and balances. What we witnessed in the past years is, after the let's say 0 years where everybody was enthusiastic about social media, we were all hoping for the Arab Spring to democratize a region in the world. The past few years we have rather been afraid that these technologies may rather be used for bad purposes than for what we would call good purposes. And we have a public sphere full of uncertainties where people do not really know anymore who to trust. And this is one of the key challenges, how to reestablish trust in this. Because if we have an increased mistrust in the content, in media, but also in procedures, in election procedures, in the basics of our societies, then people tend to less accept political decisions because they think they have not been taken in a fair way. And the reaction is something that we unfortunately also witnessed in several countries, where people become violent, go against government buildings, even killing people, destroying, contributing even more to the destruction of the established functioning system. And I think this is something where we really should find new ways and solutions to help people to re-establish trust and then to accept these decisions. So, yeah, if we want to have not just peace across countries, but also peace within countries, of people living together with different political opinions, accepting a balanced decision in the end, I think this is really the decisive point. So we have to reinvent the system of decision makers and watchdogs, like what we did with, for instance, public service media in the 20th century that worked more or less well in different countries. We have to reinvent the system of watchdogs that are mutually watching each other, creating accountability, transparency, and creating incentives for those in power, for those seeking power to behave, but also creating incentives for people to believe in the system and to take the pain to the system. And I guess we'll talk about this in more detail. The AI convention that we're currently working on is just one instrument, one element in a larger set of instruments that may be needed in order to re-establish rules that are applicable, that create trust, that people stick to, so that we can have functioning democracies also in the 21st century. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much indeed for setting the scene there. I'm going to ask David to do much the same, your opening thoughts. Suna said at the very start, this is a double-edged sword, and it really is on every aspect. All the threats and all the solutions lying in the same frame. Within your position, focusing very much on AI and digitalization, I just wonder if we can home in on where you see the big threats. Thank you.
Thank you, David. The point of view, I mean, from the Congress, we see and we can also notice some threats and some experience during the observation election that we do on a municipal level and a regional level. For us, this is, first of all, the integrity. It was already said by Suna. The integrity of the vote is fundamental, and this is really important to keep the public trust and the voter trust. And doing that, we see that many threats are existing relating to the electoral process, relating to the campaigning and candidates. And for that, we need really to be careful at all levels when we implement any voting procedure with or without electronic vote. Also, a big concern is the foreign interference that happened already several times in a different election process. We want to highlight the big risk that is called distributed denied of service, particularly against electoral government, media websites, and making some information unavailable at a key moment, especially during the election process. We saw, as instance, we saw these threats, buying fake likes on a social network. We saw that we can have fake retweets. We can have fake followers. We can have the use of troll farms to disseminate and amplify content. We can have impersonate legitimate sources of information to spread false information. We can see the use of Potemkin personas, which is like an authentic personas ranking across multiple platforms, posting contents on multiple topics to give an appearance of authenticity. Or we can also notice the abuse of ostensibility political groups deliberately to manipulate political opinion. So this is not only the e-voting process, but it's more global before the vote, during the campaign, and even during the vote day, or that we see the big threats. So this is what I can say based on the experience that we have in the Congress.
That's really helpful, David, and I think we're going to touch on many of these issues in a little more depth in a moment. I think, Julia, thank you for being with us as well. Who manages the challenge of combat, if you like, is, I think, an issue that you feel very strongly about. There's a private-public issue here at play.
Thank you, David. I want to start by thanking Parliamentary Assembly and the Swiss authorities for organizing such a wonderful event. Dear distinguished presidents, members of parliaments, experts and colleagues, I'll start by saying that we live in the era of cyber elections, as the scholars put it. Cyber elections are a global phenomenon affecting most countries in the world. Almost every EMB nowadays uses some sort of electoral technology, and more frequently than not, they need to rely on private actors to provide them with electoral technologies or cyber services. There is a number of good reasons for that. The public sector might not have the capacity to deal with complex and complicated technologies on their own. They might not have in-house expertise to develop their own solutions. They might be of the opinion that the private sector, even though run by economic interests, will deliver more cost-efficient solutions. And that's okay, that's a new reality. Due to technology and the capacities required for mastering technology, the number and the profiles of actors involved in electoral governance is expanding. So we will need to find the ways how to deal with it. It's paramount that electoral technologies are designed and operated in a secure manner. Therefore, private actors delivering technology should be held at least to the same level of security standards as the electoral officials. what we should avoid at all costs is election management bodies losing the capacity to steer and manage private actors. EMBs need the capacity to define the requirements for technologies instead of allowing vendors to tell election management bodies what voters need. Election management bodies need the capacity to examine implemented technologies and to make the vendors accountable. Because if election management bodies don't have this capacity, private vendors become in charge of running public elections, and I see the great challenge of modern elections in it. I argue that the solution lies in building, or rather rebuilding, the capacity of election management bodies. Under no circumstance may the lack of capacity be countered by further outsourcing responsibilities to private actors. It would be a vicious circle in which election management bodies can only lose. When election management bodies do not have the capacity to scrutinize private actors, they automatically depend on blind trust. And relying on blind trust, the EMBs cannot remain in control of the electoral process. Therefore, I think that rebuilding the capacity of the election management bodies is the important prerequisite for ensuring public trust. The good news is there are many instruments for rebuilding the capacity of election management bodies. So we can ensure that the public actors stay in the driving seat even when elections get digitalized. I will be happy to bring in more examples from my practice in the further discussion. That being said, and referring to the name of the panel, I strongly believe that rebuilding the internal capacity of the election management bodies is the only way for EMBs not to stay at the mercy of the private sector when electoral technologies is provided, but to stay in control of election.
Yulia, thank you very much indeed. I want to go straight into this point about who is in the driving seat, because, David, you said, there is fake everything out there. It's not just at one level. At the same time, Thomas, you said this is, at least the purpose is as old as the hills, which is to manipulate our thinking. And you referenced the AI convention. But they are way ahead of the game, it feels to me, the manipulators. So I wonder for all of you, how do you turn this around? How do you get back into the driving seat that Yulia is talking about? Let's start from you, Thomas.
Well, in this country, for instance, again, this is nothing new. We've been using radio and television since the 1920s. The first article in the Constitution was adopted in '84. And the first radio and press law was adopted in '92. So there's like 50, 60, 70 years between them. That didn't mean, and this is a good point, that didn't mean that this was, radio and television was in a law-free environment. We have human rights, we have a tradition of laws that apply to all new developments like AI. The question is then how to implement them. And when you say driver's seat, of course it is, the internet has been developed by techie freaks in California in the hippie times 50 years ago. There were no lawyers, there were no government officials there, so this is a reality. I don't think that the governments need to be in the driver's seat, but they need to be on the same level and they need to be able to cope. But again, the laws will not make it alone. It is important to step up the regulation, but we need a societal literacy about AI, about how platforms function, and about how democracy functions. And that is, in the end, the key. The other things are just tools to help.
So it's actually more about awareness, building awareness and education, in a sense, than finding the technological answer to combating some of these challenges.
It is both.
It is, yeah.
All are required.
But we'll come back to that point about the literacy of the electorate, if you like, because that's going to be key. Suna?
Yes, well, I think the media literacy of the public is a really important aspect of this. But not only that, we need to teach critical thinking in schools. We need to teach people the academic method of actually fact-checking and making sure that the information that they're getting is reliable. But not only that, our politicians also need to understand what AI is about and how technology works to at least a minimal extent, And in order for that to happen, I think there needs to be a pivotal change in terms of the approach of most parliaments to new technologies. It's like we think that they're just there on the horizon, ready for us to grab whenever we want to use them, but we don't really think so much about the enormous changes that are just around the corner because of all of these technologies. And I think we don't only need to talk about the education of the public, we also need to talk about re-education of politicians, that many don't understand at all what is just standing right in front of them. And this, I think, feeds into Julia's point, which is that we need capacity building in our election executive bodies so that they can use and understand these different technologies. And perhaps finally, in terms of how to tackle these kinds of challenges, I think it's very important that the media start looking more into a proactive role of helping with fact-checking all these troll farms, fact-checking all these deep fakes that we will now be seeing more of, and finding a way of at least trying to verify some of them, trying to see, is this actually true? Did this actually happen? And I know that the media is a bit looking for a new role after the advent of social media, and I think this watchdog role, in this sense of being a media, being a public fact checker, could be, at least one way moving forward.
Do you think, David, that has started? I mean, from the BBC perspective, fact-checking in the last 5 years has become massive. It's the biggest single sort of target for every story. How much of what has been said in parliaments like this can be borne out in truth? Has that process of undermining the negative side of AI started? Is it catching up, do you think?
I'm not sure that the fact-checking process is strong enough at the moment to counterbalance the facts that are not true sometimes. But I have to say that between the world before AI and electronic and social network and the world of today, we have the same threats, just it's going faster now. And you can, if you have any fake information, it's going like in an hour worldwide, and then it's difficult to manage that. And this is maybe where we see the biggest challenge. It's to be reactive 24/7. And we cannot just say, okay, let's see on Monday after my weekend what will happen during my campaign. And this is a big stress for the people running elections also.
So how on earth, Julia, how do you combat that? Because, the speed of change, and this is the year of AI in terms of media awareness, I think, as well, is frightening.
Yeah, already yesterday and also at this panel, there were questions how we can build the capacity, what kind of resources we can offer to the election management bodies and members of the parliament who are looking for some support. And I'll start with not a very usual suspect. I would say that I think there might be a lot of benefit from involving science more into the governance of electoral technology. And why I say so is because science is the actor who have frequently multi-country experience, and they don't have economic or political interests. That positively differentiates them from other actors involved in technology procurement or implementation. Then another instrument would be the development of national and international standards. And by standards, I mean precise technical legal requirements on which election management bodies can lean on when building their requests for proposals or implementing technology. Without such standards, it's very difficult to define what exactly you expect from technology and how you're going to examine it afterwards. Just one example from the field of online voting. Verifiability is frequently required, and without precise technical legal standards, it can mean so much and so little. So if we don't have standards developed by the public sector, maybe together with the private sector and other interested actors, we leave it at the mercy of the private vendors to decide what they're going to deliver in this regard. And the third instrument would be, of course, the EMB's cooperation, just like this forum today. I've been involved in scrutinizing the delivery of electronic voting in one very decentralized country. And what I found impressive about the experience is that small municipalities paired with other municipalities, with bigger municipalities who have more technical capacity, more resources, in order to procure electoral technologies together and in order to audit them together. And I think it shouldn't necessarily happen only inside one country, inside one jurisdiction. It can be also be facilitated through platforms like this one between different countries.
So let me move on to the issue of social media, which has been raised, and the responsibility of social media platforms, which will perhaps also take us towards foreign interference as well. Thomas, how far should the regulations go on social media platforms? Because, I mean, I think you've spelt out, we've been through these step changes over the last century, but still, those platforms are getting away, many people would say, with an awful lot, with very little sense of responsibility, at least as some would see it. How far should they be held responsible? How far can you create a sort of a collective regulatory framework?
Thank you for the question. We are now seeing attempts to regulate platforms in the EU with different legislations. Also in this country, it has now started, I guess, in most countries. And it may be necessary because, again, only fact checkers is something that it takes additional work and pain to look at things. So you may demand a certain level of quality in the making, not in the this is the content I like, or this is not in declaring what is true or what is wrong, but in prescribing some procedures under which they should operate. One thing that is also we have to keep in mind that for economic reason, in the fight of attention, there's a tendency to try and keep people on a platform by going to more and more extremist content that keeps people on the platform. Yeah. This is a natural fight for attention effect that is also not new per se, but it's coming in a new quality. And at the Council of Europe in the CDMSI already 15 years ago, we were discussing about is there a need for a public service search engine at that time, where either the algorithm is public or transparent, or where you may decide about your own algorithm, not so that I want to see things more from this direction or from that direction. So create transparency, create accountability, also create a level playing field maybe between big dominant actors and smaller ones. So in traditional times we had must carry rules in cable TV systems. So how can we make sure that people have a chance at all to see quality content? Because now it's, in this country, when I grew up, we had like one channel of radio, television, and then because it's a small country, we had the German channels and the Austrian channels, but that was it. And now you have so many channels, so you can't force people anymore to watch so-called quality-generated content. How do you make quality content equally attractive to just fast-consuming content? This is a big issue that all the regulators in the media field are struggling with, and there are some ways in terms of supporting quality content through legislation, through regulation, but then again we are on the literacy side. People also need to want to consume quality content because they need to understand how important this is for the future of their freedom.
That's part of the problem, isn't it? Because, I'll come to you in a moment, Suna, because if you look at, let's say, TikTok, for example, people love TikTok and they love what they get there and they consume there. There is the huge question mark over, the Chinese influence on TikTok, where all the data goes, the information goes. The Americans would sooner we didn't have TikTok at all. How does any regulation make any difference to that sort of challenge?
You can introduce, of course, regulation that certain content from or certain companies from some countries may not be allowed. This is something that is discussed. Or you can introduce regulation, what can be done with the data. There is, again, the EU and other systems have produced regulation. We'll see how they function. These are first attempts. So, and you may have to give some guidance to what platforms can do, to how they guide the attention of the user. that is something that is happening now, and we are kind of in a trial and error phase to see how this works. But also people need to understand, and those that try to produce quality, they need to understand, and people themselves, how their psychic minds function. So how to deal with addiction potential of platforms of extremist contents. And this is something that we all those that have a role in this need to know how this understands, and together need to work out on several elements of how to combat this, how to empower people to withstand also some temptations. It's the same with drugs in the end. You can forbid drugs, but they will not go away. You need to learn people to say, I'm not going there because it's not good for me or it's not good for society. But of course you can support this with regulation.
Back to the literacy issue, isn't it? Again, Suna, sorry, you wanted to come in.
Well, yes, and in terms of the responsibility of social media networks, I wanted to point out that, practices such as micro-targeting and this flooding of fake news that has been allowed to go through social media is something that I think can be regulated and should be tackled, and should actually just be done at the own initiative of these companies if they want to remain relevant, and in general to tackle these different means of misuse on these channels. So we're talking about, just before, fake retweets, fake followers, all of these things. I think the social media platforms themselves are the best capable of actually tackling and finding ways to deal with in some meaningful way. I know that you cannot, get rid of all of it, but I think if there were some true effort and ambition behind it, we would be rid of a lot of the misinformation out there and a lot of the fake bots that are creating content that is not real and is bothering the electoral process. What is also important to note when it comes to social media platforms is the issue of free speech and how incredibly influential platforms like Facebook and Twitter have become when it comes to the rights of people to express their opinions and to participate in democratic debate. This is something that we haven't really addressed fully, but now Facebook is deciding what is fake news and what is not in means that we don't necessarily agree with. So here I think also we need to collaborate with them to come up with, how do we best do this, respecting the principles of freedom of expression, necessity, prescribed by law, all of this predictability that we count on here in the human rights sphere. And then finally, I think it's also very important to note the very fearful potential of surveillance because of all of the information that we give away from us using these platforms. And just imagine that, we don't need to imagine, there are many places where there is no real democracy and where your opinions can get you in jail or worse. And when these social media platforms collect information about what voters think, what individuals think, they're also potentially feeding information to the oppressors that would use it against them at a later stage if they vote the wrong way, if they express the wrong opinion in the debate, and so on and so forth. So this is something that I think is a big challenge for the social media platforms. How are they going to get secure enough to not be abused like that?
And whether that is actually happening or not, the perception is there that it could be happening, so the fear is there, which sort of helps us to move on to the more direct issue for us, I think, which we're talking about elections and voting. Let's have a look at e-voting, if we can, David, for a moment, because we've heard over the course of a day and a half now many examples of tried and failed, try and try again, still a lack of public confidence in e-voting. How do you change that? Can you change that?
Donc peut-être je me permets de parler en français.
Perhaps I'll speak in French. So electronic voting, let me give the example of Switzerland. We've been discussing this at the moment, in fact, and there are a number of some draft legislation that's being called into question about this, and there are going to be elections that will be held shortly, which will test out a new system. And this system is being placed at the disposal of citizens who are willing to take part in the test. Now, if you're going to put into place an electronic voting procedure, you need the very minimum for it to be as reliable as traditional voting, which you're physically voting in a ballot box. Let me give you one example of problems we've experienced, in fact, with some elections and votes held in Switzerland recently, well, it's actually recording people's recording suffrage or votes. In other words, people who have networks of friends who will take their voting slips, so they'll fill in the voting slips if they're having a sort of a voting in advance. And in writing, if you like, and they send it in ahead of the votes. Now, this is one problem we've had in Switzerland, even though Switzerland is seen as a country with a model democracy. And in the e-voting procedure that's currently being tested out, based on experience that I've had with this, because I've tested it out myself, this whole issue is still the case. That is, if the voter hands in their voting slip with electronic vote to a third party, this third party, based on the test that I've tried, can vote once again for someone else, on behalf of someone else. Now, which means we haven't yet managed to iron out all the problems that we've had in the past with traditional physical voting systems. So this, I think, is one challenge we have to rise to with regard to electronic voting. At the very least it should be as good as, if not better, than the physical voting in terms of reliability and security. So it's a technological challenge, is that right?
Technological challenge rather than a practical challenge in terms of the sort of execution.
Yes, indeed, it's a technological challenge, you're right, because ultimately the more security you have, the more the procedure becomes complicated. Let's imagine, for instance, we have a highly secure system where the voter will perhaps have to have several means of identifying themselves, by electronic means being identified by authorities. Will have to perhaps contact them in advance with this, and once they've been given their voter ID, then they can perhaps go and vote secretly as such in a unique way, and this will mean that a lot of people perhaps are going to be ruled out of this because they're not very comfortable with using digital means, and once again this will create sort of a digital divide, as we call it, between people who are equipped with all the relevant ID equipment and people who aren't.
Trust in the authorities carrying out these procedures, or a distrust in the digitalized world that we all live in? I mean, I understand why. I don't understand why it doesn't work better. That's the bottom line. We'll hear from Estonia, which is a little bit later this morning. One tick for Estonia, which gets over the 50% barrier. But otherwise, it's simply a failure still. Any views, Thomas?
Well, I would like to contradict my Swiss colleague. I think the traditional system that we have in Switzerland, but in particular the voting by mail, is super easy. And it is fairly safe. You can fake manually maybe 100 votes, but you cannot fake millions of votes or hundreds of thousands. This is just very difficult to do. Whereas if these systems, and this is not only a technical problem, even if the electronic system is technically safe, but people don't believe those that say it is technically safe, they will not use it. So it is both, or the other way around. Even if it's not safe, but they are told that it's safe and they believe it, they may use it. So the question is, in our particular case, what do we gain if we have a good system? Of course, for the Swiss living abroad, this is an asset, but for people here, it's not really, we don't suffer with our current system. But again, the thing is trust, and trust has a technical component, it has a personal component, a sociological component, and we need to work on all of these things. And for instance, one way to check it is if you split then the results in municipalities and you see that the commune of 200 people that normally votes very conservative, suddenly in a particular vote votes completely in an unexpected way, that this would raise questions. But that has got nothing to do with the technology used for the voting, but the analyzation of the vote, respecting privacy, but going into detail so that people can see, there may be something wrong, intentionally or even unintentionally. So there are ways to create trust. There are criteria to create trust.
But perhaps also there's the security and the safety paradigm. You know, there's always, when it comes to e-voting, you have to look, and this is something I hope we're going to be able to discuss more in the next panel, is, you know, either you can have a full secrecy of the vote or full security of the vote. And it's very difficult to find a balance between the two where you really feel like you have both. So this is one of the big challenges.
Julia.
Thank you. I want to build on what David said about trust. From my research, I would say that in developed democracies, internet voting or any other type of technology is not introduced to build trust. Trust is already there to the electoral process. Developed democracies have well-established electoral processes, transparent and understandable. So when we introduce any type of technology, because there are reasons for introducing it, we need to make sure that it doesn't turn the well-established electoral process in a black box. That was the first point. Then I can say a few words about Estonia, but I know that my colleagues will do a better job. I don't think Estonia is the only success case of internet voting, but we can learn from the Estonian experience. What I personally find fascinating about Estonia is the unique partnership, symbiotic partnership, which the public sector managed to build with the private sector, and in cooperation with each other, they developed the internet voting system, which they use from election to election. I think that's the key, because having such a relationship, it requires capacity from the election management bodies and from the public sector in general to steer, to manage, to be an active participant, to raise the demands for the private counterparts, to scrutinize the developed technology. And let's not forget that Estonia has internet voting now for more than 15 years. And for all these years, they didn't stop improving this system. So I think that there will be more and more success cases. Countries will come there. It just takes time.
Okay, thank you. I'm being too negative, but it will take time, clearly. Look, we're going to come to some questions and interventions from the floor as well now, not least on the question of foreign interference. The catalogue of Russian and Chinese interference in elections over the last 5 or 10 years is pretty well established. But let me ask, first of all, Valentina Martinez-Ferro, who's the rapporteur on foreign interference at PACE, to make her intervention. Maria.
Thank you. Thank you. It's a pleasure being here. As you're all saying this morning, we're all confronting with a deteriorating security environment in which hybrid threats are more and more significant. One of these threats is foreign interference that can disrupt the way our societies function by exploiting vulnerabilities and challenging the values that are fundamental to our way of life, such as democracy, the rule of law, and human rights. Foreign interference occurs when activity carried out by or on behalf of foreign power is coercive, corrupting, deceptive, or clandestine, and contrary to a country's sovereignty, values, and national interests. It involves foreign powers trying to secretly and improperly interfere in society to advance their strategic, political, military, social, or economic goals at others' expense. And foreign interference in elections, as we are saying this morning here, is a direct threat to democracy and national security. Democracy requires political participation and informed voters. And as Suna and the other panelists have said this morning, the integrity of the vote is essential to democracy that is based on public trust, and in spreading disinformation and hacking into voting machines, they have eroded the trust that citizens could have in election security and the information they hear. Some people, especially in those countries who have already suffered these attacks, perceive election systems as insecure and easily manipulated. Evidence of active interference by foreign actors in the democratic processes of our state have shown the rising threats facing free and fair elections, such as interference target not only democratic processes but all aspects of democratic functioning. It is therefore a menace to the democratic security of our states as well as to the preservation of peace and stability internationally. The broad set of tools are numerous, as you know. Foreign funding to political parties, the spread of disinformation, cyber attacks against election infrastructure, radicalization of the political narrative, and instrumentalization of migration, for example. These have all been mobilized these years. These have aimed to damage trust in democracies and their institutions. We can expect the threat and the scale of foreign interference to continue to evolve and grow in the years to come. The Russian Federation large-scale aggression against Ukraine and its hybrid character have highlighted the urgency for democracies to update their national security concepts and continue work to upgrade election security and combat disinformation. We need mechanisms to maintain public trust and confidence to protect free and fair elections, as you were saying this morning. The report I have the honor to write is Foreign Interference, a Threat to Democratic Security in Europe, is currently being drafted. Response to these serious threats and will look to make recommendations aimed at equipping Council of Europe member states with appropriate tools to prevent, detect, counter and sanction foreign interference. As you have said, we need to work on the capacity buildings of politicians and systems. The importance of examining this issue at the European level is clear. These are issues that cannot be managed alone at the national level. Coordinating actions is crucial, and the strengthening of cooperation between democracies are an important plank of this. That's why it's so important to present and open up the report to your ideas and suggestions today. Equally, responses need to involve the whole society. The report will look at the key aspects of developing societal resilience to counter threats effectively. These responses must finally ensure consistency with our own values and standards and respect the very norms that we are trying to protect. This is the last, but probably the most important point. Thank you.
Maria, thank you very much. Can I ask you a question as well? Sure. I mean, for coordination to work, intelligence sharing is going to be critical. How much readiness is there across Europe for intelligence sharing? The United States and the UK and the Five Eyes love to talk about the power of their collective intelligence. We know about the methods of foreign interference, but without that intelligence sharing, it's difficult to undermine it, isn't it?
It is, and I think, well, right now we have the European Parliament at the European Union level trying to work on this, and I think it's really important that the Council of Europe also, stays on the spot for contributing to this sharing of information and to build up what are we going to do at the European level.
Thank you very much. Thomas, can I ask you, again, we're back on this issue of awareness and literacy. Maria has outlined a whole list of areas where the problems lie, and there must be a greater public understanding of these issues now than there was 5 years ago. Is there some breakthrough in terms of public awareness yet, in terms of literacy? You can quote Switzerland, but perhaps even on a broader scale.
Yes, thank you. I think the Corona experience has alarmed us about a significant percentage of the people that do not trust any kinds of institutions anymore, that do not trust science. So the whole notion of evidence-based decision-making, of course, gets difficult when people just ignore the evidence. What happened since the 21st February last year also has shown that some people don't know who to trust or trust information that we think, well, where's the basis for trusting this? And again, an election process can be 100% secure if one charismatic political leader comes and says, they cheated, let's go and fight. If the majority follows or a significant, so you need both. You need technical standards, you need, the Council of Europe has developed a number of valuable soft law for media coverage of election campaigns, for managerial electoral processes. So the guidance is there. The guidance is there from the Council of Europe in terms of soft law, some conventions. There's so much expertise. We just need to do it, and the people need to ask politicians and ask the media to do it. They need to want it. Otherwise, yeah, it remains a theory, and this is not really where we should stay at.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. I can say we've got a number of interventions already here to draw upon. And I'd like to just say two things. It'd be great to hear from some new voices as well. But also, so I'd like to ask you, Mr. Lopatka, to intervene. But also, can we keep them tight, please, as tight as we can, because I want everyone to get a chance to speak. Thank you.
Oh, okay, I will try to do my best. I want to underline what Thomas Schneider said. Elections play a key role to keep trust in our political system, and especially after times of COVID. Now facing the full-scale war in Europe, we should do everything to keep this trust of our people, that they can really trust in the system. So what I want to say is I'm personally absolutely in favor of e-voting, but we should avoid mistakes. We in Austria, we did such a mistake. We started very early on the level of universities, and we had big technical problems. So our people, meanwhile, lost this trust in e-voting. They see only the threats, and there's a lack of confidence. So what to do? I think what we should do is to work on e-voting systems to keep the voters' turnout high. I think it is very important. We are losing from election to election a high standard of voters' turnout. But we should do it in a technical, absolutely safe system. And we have to explain this system in different ways before we start with it. So I think if we don't do it, we can lose of this trust. And the parties who are in the center in the European Union, and when I look at all countries of the Council of Europe, at the last elections, they lost. And we have a party on the right wing side, which is absolutely against e-voting. So this is another point we have to see. So I think we have to continue to do everything, because otherwise we will lose, because more and more young people live in this e-world, and we have to offer them also a voting system in their world. Thank you.
A real conundrum, isn't it? Don't do it unless you get it right, but you must do it, which is a challenge. Can I ask Erkin Gadirli from Azerbaijan? Thank you, Erkin.
Thank you very much, David, and very grateful to the panel. Since yesterday, we had very interesting discussions. Yesterday, we were mainly focused on norms, rules, and regulations. Today, we'll talk about technology. All of them are indicators of knowledge-based approach. But life is much richer, and many other factors influence human behavior. So I have a quick question to any one of you, and I will be glad if I get an answer. Don't you think that this electronic voting, let's put it this way, could further discourage people from voting? Because voting day is a communicative process. People come together, see each other, chat, ask questions, learn news, especially in the rural communities. And these new technologies, I mean, just like in restaurants, you don't talk to waiters anymore. I mean, you ask for a menu and they point out to the QR code on the table, and then you feel like you are not a client anymore. I mean, it's kind of, you could actually call and ask for a delivery service to bring a food to home or office. So don't you think that there could be the same effect if you further expand the use of electronic voting? Maybe in some countries, like Estonia, it works perfectly well, but it's also a cultural phenomenon. In many other countries, or within the country, it could differ from region to region. People could be discouraged, don't you think? Thank you very much.
It's the fabric of our society that e-voting is breaking down. David?
Thank you. Mr. Gadirli, I think that's an interesting point. But if we're talking about electronic voting, then I think we have to consider it in something the same way as postal voting. If you are voting by post, again, you don't go to a polling station, you don't meet other people, so it's something similar. So I think the question is, do you go to a ballot box and vote, or do you have the option of voting without actually having to go somewhere? And whether it's a postal vote or an electronic vote, I don't think it makes any difference to that. But yes, what you say is right. As a member of the Congress, I have observed elections in a number of countries, and I have seen that election day or voting day is a big day, and there's a social aspect to it in many places, especially in rural areas. As you have said, people do meet one another, so we have to bear that in mind. So that's what I would say in response to your point. Turning now to what was said by the gentleman from Austria. Electronic voting, I don't think is there necessarily to increase participation rates. It's just another tool that's available, something similar to postal voting. But if we want to motivate people to vote, that's something different. That's a question of the general policies that we pursue. We need to have policies that people are interested in voting for. It's not the voting method that's going to change that.
Thomas, thank you.
Trying to give a quick answer. In Switzerland, it's actually the other way around, that we are told that we are old-fashioned, and in particular, some people hope that young people would go voting more because it's fancier to vote via a mobile phone than to do it the traditional way. And we have Barbara Peria that is here. She will be on the next panel. She's dealing with voting and e-voting in Switzerland for 20 years. I think the key is which procedures are inclusive or exclusive. So if the system is too complicated, and people with low digital skills cannot vote, it's not good. But if you need to travel 15 hours to your place of birth and queue for two days in order to get access to a physical voting, and you have to go to work. So it's not the voting, whether electronic or letter or urn, it's the how a particular system is done, whether it's safe, trustworthy, and whether it's efficient. And it's always a combination, like Suna said, and privacy respective. And it's not the black or white thing. It's actually the devil, like always, is in the detail.
But then very briefly on this, is there a day that will come where the only way we vote is e-voting? Because that's the sort of logic of our technological progression. Or is it, as you said, David, really, it's going to be one part, one option among many? A or B? First or second? Very briefly, thank you.
Well, I think you could envisage, at the end of the day, having a different system where you might only have electronic voting, but it could be made available in a polling station. So, in other words, if you weren't very happy with electronic voting from home, you could go to a polling station and vote there. There'd be some kind of equipment there, and if you had a morning to do that, you would, of course, immediately have the result, because the advantage of the system is you can get the result immediately.
They come to the polling station to e-vote, so there may be a way around it. Excuse me. Let me move on to. I'd like to ask Victoria Podgorna from Ukraine. Victoria, thank you very much.
Thanks for the invitation. In Ukraine, a situation unique and complex. My colleagues spoke about that. We do need to preserve the accomplishments of democratic development and democratic elections that we amassed previously, but we do need new innovative decisions as well, because we're facing really complex challenges caused by the war. And it's not only about the destroyed infrastructure, that's the issues with the human resources at the election commissions. And 20% of our people are in the other countries. They fled from the war, and we need to arrange election processes for these people as well. So the issue is not new for Ukraine, and back in 2020, we were addressed by the Ukrainians working abroad. That's 1.52 million people that were really keen on introducing e-voting in our country. And in the parliament, we had the working group set up to develop the issues on e-voting. And then we commissioned the survey from IFES, that was the joint work from the Ministry of Digital Transformations. We had wide discussions with representatives of technical experts including, and then we came to the conclusion that there was no possibility to secure international standards of these elections and democracy of elections then through this method of voting. And the most important thing is the digital infrastructure was underdeveloped then. With the beginning of the war, voting out of the country is a critical issue. We are talking about 7-10 million of people that are living in other countries, and 70% of these people are keen on voting. They do want to exercise their right to vote. So today we do understand that to hold elections of this scale, with the polling stations being consular offices is next to impossible. So we do need innovative decisions. And if 2-3 years ago we were saying that we don't have technical infrastructure available, we don't have digital accomplishments to this end, so with the setting up of Ministry of Digital Transformations, that's a unique ministry, we have a huge breakthrough in digitalization. We have 40 digital services provided at the moment, and almost half of the people use DIA application. So we do have significant changes when it comes to digitalization of this society. There was speed up the accomplishments when it comes to cybersecurity. We have new agencies set up. We have 12 secrets of digital security and cybersecurity applied and introduced. We have a cyber strategy and action plan that's part of national interests. But unfortunately, we have more than 2,000 cyber attacks on the part of Russian Federation against Ukraine, and we have ongoing disinformation campaigns. So we are under ongoing cyber threat. Despite that, our digital infrastructure is stable and it allows for the use of innovative tools. Another question whether it's worth doing immediately after the war at the first post-war elections, because we do have other limitations, political and organizational. We don't have the political consensus on the part of the stakeholders as to the use of e-voting. Most believe that the risks are very high for the development of Ukrainian democracy. Additionally, Ukrainians are not really supportive of e-voting. Only 19% of the Ukrainians abroad would be willing to do that. Apart from that, we haven't tested these technologies yet. So it's very important for us to learn the experience of other countries, and that's more than 20 countries that have applied different innovative decisions. We need to test them prior to using, and it should be properly governed, well, legally and technically. Thank you.
That explanation, of course, right on the front line of all the cyber challenges in the world at the moment. Konstantinos.
Thank you very much. I prepared a short intervention, not more than 3 minutes, so I will do it. There is no doubt that the artificial intelligence is a useful tool or a language or method, a reliable method, and can serve the democratic process when wisely used. It can offer the electorate and voters registration, especially at the time of crisis. And yesterday we heard what happened in Turkey, or what will happen in Ukraine with the displaced persons and voters. It can provide also equal access to information, to the spread of ideas, and to the democratic dialogue, which is indispensable in democracy. Can be used also in voting and counting, making our life easier, but the title of the discussion reveals our concern. It is true that the elections are very serious and important to be left at the mercy of digital. One must not forget that digital is not something self-existent. Someone is using it, someone has created it, someone is controlling it, someone has programmed it. That is the reason we call it artificial intelligence. So being at the mercy of it, that means that being at the mercy of the one who owns or controls it. The real problem starts when the owner of the master of the artificial intelligence is deeply involved in the electoral process or the power game. There is a potential manipulation or misuse of it. Cyber attacks, as mentioned before, and foreign interference are an issue, and we discussed it for years, especially the accusations of Russia's interference in the USA elections some years ago. What is the role of elections in democracy? It is the confirmation of citizens' participation and the renewal of trust. It is just a matter of trust towards the democratic system and the representative principles. As a matter of trust, we have to be vigilant when the matter comes to the elections. Imagine the damage the people trust will suffer in case where the allegations of either of misuse of the artificial intelligence when counting the votes, or for any unlawful or abusive ballot procedure, or even the interference with the whole process of elections. We all agree that elections are not limited to the day of ballots, but it's a process starting from the very next day of the previous elections. So, any manipulation of the democratic institution, any misinformation, suppression of the other point or ideas, repression, fear or intimidation, some of the problems democracy may face when the artificial intelligence is being misused. There are still discussions. For instance, I'll give you an example. There, 19 years ago, was a discussion, and still is a discussion, who really won in the American presidential elections, Alan Gore or Bush, the counting of Florida's votes. Yes. So I think that coming to transparency, we all use artificial intelligence only if we are in a position to control it and to be to avoid its misuse. If we cannot control it, if we cannot have a transparent system of regulating, then it's better not to be left on the mercy of the artificial intelligence. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Konstantinos. Wise words. We've just got time for one more intervention. Irina.
Thank you. From the point of EMB view, thank you to the speakers. They mentioned the legal standards, but we need procedural guarantees and actually practical elements and capacity building in that area. And I will give you the practical example. In 2010, when the first time the application for transfer of the results from the Central Election Commission level to the Municipal Election Commission level was prepared to be done electronically, which is not some very advanced new technology, the company who did that job kept the so-called source code. Now, I know that source code is actually the key for that application. But at that time, I was not aware what is the source code, and IT department didn't warn me as a president at that time of the CC, and none of my colleagues, and none of my staff. And now, when we got our lessons that actually we cannot change anything in that application, after contacting again many years after, only that company put us in position to favorize someone, and you know that everything has to be public procurement. And thanks to the OSCE and their reaction, because they were somehow in the middle of CEC of Bosnia and Herzegovina and that company, we managed to get source code. So now, lessons learned, put in our contracts always, who will own the new technology? You can be systematically manipulated even if the technology is secure from the external factors, because you who are running elections cannot run your own application. So that's important. That's the capacity building that we need. And we are changing. CEC members are leaving. Our staff is leaving as well. So it has to be continuous lessons learned. Thank you.
Irina, thank you very much. That talks straight to your point, Julia, I think.
Yes, I can't agree more. I'm very glad that previous contributors, Irena, brought this up. Internet voting is quite a sophisticated technology, so when a country decides to do something with internet voting, usually we get some attention to this technology. We try to involve technical experts, we try to draft the contracts more carefully, but election management bodies use multiple area of technologies, starting from the very tiny one up to vote counting machines, vote casting machines. And all of them need to be scrutinized in the very same manner as we scrutinize internet voting. Otherwise, the things, like Irena said, happens. Vendors, you introduce electoral technology not properly from the first time, it might be a very, very big deal for the next decades to come. You fall into the puff dependency, you need to stick to the same vendor, and then you need to involve international actors trying to get away from this trap. So I would like to draw attention to each little piece of technology which exists at every election administration, and try to look at it with more critical eyes, as Suna said. Yeah.
Okay, Julia, thank you very much. Suna, as chair, we're halfway through an issue of the digital dangers, and we're going to look at the joys of digital coming up in another half hour or so. Would you like to make some concluding remarks now, or save them to the end?
Well, just very briefly, David, thank you. I think, what we can collate from this session is that there's nothing new about the distortion of information and misinformation in relation to elections and other important decision-making processes, just like Thomas mentioned here before. But perhaps that the scale and effect have multiplied quite significantly. And we've also gone through some of the means by which these misinformation campaigns are being produced. And that is, foreign interference, DDoSs, information blockades, and buying all sorts of influence in social media, which is a very impactful method of influencing public opinion. And, we've gone over ways of trying to mitigate it, and also the responsibility of social media platforms in combating it. But I think it's also important to note the point that Julia has made, that we cannot let private actors take over the election process, and that's why the last intervention about keeping the source code is so important, not only in elections, might I add, just as a true and tested pirate, but in all purchases of software, hardware, whatever it is, for public authorities, because otherwise you are trapped with one company that can overcharge you for all of the services, and systems need to develop. All systems have to be updated and developed. And if you don't get the source code, you're trapped. So please do get the source code always. I'm not going to go into all the other really, really interesting contributions that we had here, but I think that we have a lot of food for thought for the next session moving forward. But now, I hope coffee.
Absolutely, yeah, coffee, absolutely. 20-minute coffee break, starting again at 10:02, so that's 15 minutes now. Once again, thank you very much to our panel. Many thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, we're going to make a start now on this session, so if you'd like to take a seat, that would be really helpful. As you do, you may see that there is a draft declaration being circulated. It will come round in just a moment if you haven't got it already. This is really a reference to the conference itself. Please do have a read through. It would be nice that everyone is comfortable with that declaration. If you do have any points that you want to make, particular points, then if you could communicate that with Rasto, who's our rapporteur, who's pulled all this together, that would be really helpful, either straight after the session or, of course, get in touch with him via our various digital means. Okay, thank you very much indeed. So we're moving on to what is, in theory, the brighter side of digital. And I'm delighted to be able to hand straight to Suna to introduce our panel and get this underway. Thank you, Suna.
Thank you very much. So, as I said in the beginning of this second day of our very important and interesting conference, we are looking at both the pros and the cons, the costs and the benefits of artificial intelligence and the use of technology in relation to the voting process. Now, I know that our current panelists might have a little bit of a challenge because we did address a lot of the pros and the cons in the previous panel. So it'll be difficult not to repeat some of the things that have already been said. But I don't think that you can take one without the other. It's quite difficult to have a holistic or comprehensive or sensible discussion about artificial intelligence or the use of technology in voting without looking at both the benefits and the costs or the negatives and the threats. However, I do hope that we manage to focus a little bit on the bright side. It's always good to end conferences on the brighter side of things, you know, not to leave us all with a dreadful feeling in our stomach that we're about to end up somewhere we don't like to end up, so that I put it very nicely. So what I think we'll be focusing on predominantly, but not exclusively, of course, are the benefits of the digital technology when it comes to electoral processes and how they can be incorporated into the process without compromising electoral integrity. And what I find is a very important question that I hope we'll be able to answer in some more detail now is how do we balance and how do we secure both the secrecy of the vote, but also the security of the vote, that it cannot be tampered with when we use digital technologies. We need to look into how we can use these technologies for the future, so to reevaluate long-established electoral procedures and practices, and try to innovate to make a better democracy for the future. And of course, a very vital and important component to strengthen public trust in the management of future electoral processes and how we can do that, and to which extent it is actually possible to navigate a democratic society in an almost post-fact, post-truth world. How do we re-establish truth and facts? That's a big question. I'm not going to demand an answer, but it would be great if we could head somewhere in that direction. And that being said, I'll give the floor back to our great moderator, David.
Suna, thank you. Thanks very much indeed. Yeah, it is, after all, digital's a tool, isn't it? It's a channel, so must be able to use it to the best of its advantages as well. And Oliver, I'm going to start with you, because Estonia has been one of the talking points, in fact, over the last 2 days. Let's not pretend it's been an unmitigated triumph, but nonetheless, perhaps you could give us some introductory remarks on the way in which that's worked. We need to hear it from the horse's mouth.
Yeah, thank you. Just not to just say that, well, copy all our system and then it's perfect and then you should try it. Just to go into more detail, first of all, elections are nowadays not made just on election day, and ICT can be used or should be used in a more different ways or means during the electoral processes, starting from the campaign or fact-checking. So if the candidate says that if you vote for me and I'm elected, the war in Ukraine will end in 48 hours, and this information will spread among all the voters, you just have to address it and try to find out such false information or disinformation, misinformation, and address it. Also, let's say, equal time in the media can be very well addressed or controlled through the use of ICT, campaign financing, report checking, or verification of support signatures, voter identification in polling stations. There are very many different options which should be addressed by the use of ICT. And if we know about the role of social media or AI used by the political parties during campaigning, well, the election management bodies certainly cannot just stay silent and disregard all what's going on in the society. From the perspective of Estonia, I think the internet voting was also not invented just out of blue, but it was coming along what the society was expecting while using internet in all different sectors or aspects, starting from let's say text declarations over the internet or whatever application to the state or local government institutions, which were, let's say, very widely used over the internet. Concerning the internet voting, I think the most positive what can be said is that it's not important where the voter is situated or located. Whether the voter is traveling abroad, whether the voter is in refugee status abroad or IDP in another area of the country or just studying in a university far away. It's very easy to vote wherever you are over the internet. And also another aspect, observation of the election processes, electoral processes is, let's say, much more easier if it's partly online, or it's not important for the observers to be present at the location. If the election processes take place just in the polling station, you need always an observer there. But if the procedures are, let's say, more centralized by using internet voting, it's easier to have, let's say, a clear understanding for political parties or whatever stakeholders to address these problems which might arise. It can't be just put covered somewhere. What concerns the trust or building of trust, I think in last panel it was addressed very well. Just using ICT or internet voting cannot build trust. It's based on Estonian experience. I would say that, well, we had just in March parliamentary elections where most of the votes, 51% of the votes, were given over the internet. Which means that there's quite a wide level of trust in the internet voting. But there's still a big part of the society who's very much against it and considers that it's just a fraud and the results are falsified. It leads to a high level of polarization on the electoral processes in general. And in order to cope with it or address it, the country which is using ICT on a large extent or internet voting the election management bodies have to be independent, really independent. And it's also important to have a high level or wide level of election observation, international election observation missions, which would address the problems properly. Internet voting is like having a very huge polling station where all the problems which might come up will be, let's say, like multiplied. It's not like we have some problems in a small polling station. If there are problems in internet voting, it has a very big impact on the election results.
It's across the piece, isn't it? Yeah, yes. If it works. Oliver, can I just hold you there? I will leave it there for the moment. Yeah. And apologies, I should have introduced you properly. Judge Kask is the President of the National Election Commission of Estonia, hence his expertise. Also a substitute member of the Venice Commission of the Council of Europe. Therese, let me turn to you. Therese Pearce-Larnella is head of electoral processes at the IDEA. Therese, perhaps can you just give us a sort of overview, if you can, of the ways in which tech and the innovation that tech almost imposes upon us can help for electoral processes?
Sure. And I would say that it speaks really well, the answer I'm going to give speaks really well to the theme that arose very much through the panels yesterday. And what rose was this theme of resilience, like how do you handle what hits you, and also this theme of institutions. So if we combine them, kind of resilient institutions. And if we think of resilient institutions as ones that are able to handle whatever hits you, even if you don't know what it is, but in this world, as we learned over the past couple of days, and as we've been living through in the past couple of years, all you know for sure is that something will hit you. And this is the environment in which electoral authorities are being asked to be resilient. And I think Irena's just explained it beautifully in her interventions. Like, this is what we are facing, and how do we do this? And we learned yesterday that, so the electoral authorities are faced with both delivering elections, which are not particularly easy to do, and in an environment where things are uncertain. And they're being expected to deliver elections in more diverse ways, as we are hearing now. So the crises that we heard about yesterday, each of them, the pandemic, the natural hazards, and the conflict situation ones, are accelerating trends that are already underway. That's what we heard. We saw that COVID accelerated the trend towards multiple forms of voting, which was already happening. The expectation to vote in advance, to have multiple forms of getting that vote. That's complicated to organize multiple streams of voting. We also have seen the trend towards more results, wanting more results fast. And that happens particularly in a polarized environment. The longer the results are delayed, the more the suspicions start arising. And we also saw an expectation to be able to handle people in movement. So even before the mass exodus from Ukraine, and even before the Turkish example with the earthquakes or the fires and so forth, where people have to go, there's already a disconnect between what used to be the mainstay of election administration, which is that human beings are connected to their house, and that house is connected to a polling station. And that was already disintegrating with people just moving, kids going to school somewhere else and so forth. So that ability to deal with who someone is, having them be able to vote somewhere else, and having them only be able to vote once. That is where technology is essential. Otherwise, you can't keep track of it like you used to be able to. So you're doing that in an environment, as we learned yesterday, where you're planning for these multiple forms of voting and complex dealings with citizens in a climate change environment where you don't know if it's going to be hotter or colder or drier or wetter. So you're buying machinery, for example, that has to be able to handle wet, cold, if in very, very remote places. Remember that elections are not just capital cities, they are islands, they are mountaintops, they are small villages, desert areas, and so forth. And so the equipment that you choose has to be able to handle all those different situations. And with climate change, we have no idea. We're also organizing this complexity in a situation of diminishing security. We're seeing attacks against polling officials in ways that we couldn't have imagined. In Canada, for instance, the most civil place you can imagine, for the first time, they spoke about incivility to polling officials in the last election, with masks being torn off and so forth. So these attacks on election officials. And we also, and not to mention cybersecurity and so forth, so attacks on processes, attacks on officials. And then we're facing supply chain and inflation issues, that we don't know how much things will cost in the future, or if you're going to be able to get the parts that you need. So this is the environment in which you're trying to organize this. So I would put the emerging trends in three things, and I'll just say them quickly, and that is I don't see the emerging trends so strongly in e-voting. It will come, but the real trends are in efficiency to be able to handle that multiplicity of challenges. So this idea of impeccable delivery that we heard yesterday, the fact that every mistake will be amplified and will be publicly known, the fact that you are in a very tight timeline across the whole country, and the fact that you're dealing with multiple kinds of voting. So that's one. And the other side is the outreach side. Radical transparency, showing people everything that you're doing. And we see the United States as leaders in this, where you can even follow your ballot all the way through. And fearless independence, that is using every single platform to protect the values of elections. And that's what election commissions are using these ICT platforms for. Thanks.
Really interesting. I'm going to pick you up on that, almost the very last point about the US and being, a leader in transparency, and yet it's also a leader in distrust at the moment, voter distrust. So
they're connected.
Yeah, exactly. That's the problem with technology. How do you overcome that issue about technology? Please, yeah.
Yeah, so the U.S. is an extraordinary place, and I think what's very exciting now is that there used to be two conversations. There was a global conversation about elections, and then there was a U.S. conversation about elections, and those two did not meet. All of that changed when the U.S. realized that they could learn from abroad, but I think conversely we can also learn from the US. And if there's one thing about the US is it's decentralized. That means that experimentation is happening everywhere. And so we can see that experimentation in ways that are difficult to do on a national context or in a less decentralized environment. But they've also got the imperative to do things because the distrust is so high. So they are trying everything, and you will find examples of that. So that's why it's very interesting to look at the US right now.
Thank you very much. That's very, very good to hear that. That sense of experimentation is a slightly worrying word around elections, isn't it? Suna, did you want to come in there before I get to Georgi?
Yeah, just a few points, because I come from a very small place, Iceland, where we don't really face the problem of having to identify voters because we're all already registered, and if you cannot make it to your assigned polling station on election day, that you can go and vote in an off polling station for weeks in advance, and also during election day you just have to give up, okay, this is my vote. But what sort of challenges me in this sense is, this idea of radical transparency and being able to follow your ballot. Doesn't that in some way compromise also the secrecy of the vote? I'm always very, if you want security, then you have to forego a little bit of the secrecy. So I wonder, how do we ensure both? And I feel like I would really like to hear from both of the previous speakers, what are the best ways of ensuring that, in particular in building, trust when it comes to the electoral process with the public?
Well, that's a really good point, and we will come to that in a moment. First, though, Georgi, Chair of the Central Electoral Commission of Georgia, perhaps you can share your digitalization experience.
Thank you very much, David. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, dear honorable participants and speakers of this panel, as well as from previous speakers. I guess this is a very timely and significant event that is targeted on the certain topics that has been very sensitively chosen, because today we saw how the technologies, disinformation, trust raised a lot of questions, a lot of comments in that regard, because this is the majority topics that troubles us and raises certain concerns in the field of elections, because whatever good things, whatever electoral reforms we do in that regard, still, if there are cases of false narratives, if there is a miss or malinformation, everything ruins all the good things that you do in this regard. So with that, let me come back just for 1 minute to comment on previous platform, because I wanted to contribute it pretty much, and I'm glad that Teresa is here, because I'm just going to provide you with the passage from the IDEA research that has been previously conducted. So, as we all know, that the era of social media has brought about an unprecedented level of connectivity, yet it has also enabled the proliferation and flourishing of disinformation and false narratives. So with regards to this topic, I would like to provide a response studied by International Institute for Democracy and Electoral Assistance, international idea that we all know, entitled The Information Environment Around Elections. So International IDEA carried out comprehensive research on instances of disinformation, specifically targeting national elections in 53 countries across all continents between 2016 and 2022. And the research revealed that electoral management bodies, particularly those in mid-performing democracies, including Georgia, were targeted by disinformation in 94% of attacks against organizations. So interestingly, many developed nations such as France, Germany, Australia, and several others are at the forefront of disinformation attacks. We are all confronted with international discredited by various independent institutions, resulting in harm of our reputation and credibility. This in turn fuels mistrust that has been already mentioned several times, polarization, and suspicion regarding the legitimacy of election administrations and their actions. So let me share with you a short brief information about the experience that we have reflected on this. So to establish a robust defense mechanism and serve as a dependable source of information for all stakeholders and voters, we have launched an Information Protection Center. The center operates around the clock to monitor and detect all types of threats and assists in providing accurate and actionable information campaigns planned by the administration. Our primary objective is to ensure prompt and effective responses through proactive measures and to equip ourselves with factual information that counters biased media and false observers and political agendas. Additionally, Georgian election administration has spearheaded initiatives that promote public dialogue and constructive debates during election campaigns. So this is one of the mechanisms that we tried to identify to combat against disinformation, against wrong perceptions that might be formed and built in during the election time, especially when you might be, some of you, aware that in 2024 general parliamentary elections, there will be huge technological intervention where 90% of Georgian voters will experience two types of technology means in elections. This is a voter verification, voter registration or identification. In some other countries might be used different terms in that regard, and vote casting and vote counting machines, right? So it means that on the one hand, the government, politicians are conducting a huge electoral reform, and on the other hand, it should not be ruined because of coming out from the political agendas and false narratives that are spread through media and affiliated local observer organizations. So let me come back to the question that I was charged to respond to, that is related to technological innovations and the current experience from Georgia just recently on 29th of April in regards to respond to the Venice Commission recommendations and opinion jointly made by all, as well as by OSCE ODIHR, that before conducting large-scale elections, you should have conducted several pilots in your country. And these midterm elections gave us opportunity to see in practice, and it was conducted in 10 municipalities in 165 polling stations. That was exactly great opportunity to us to see how it works in practice, what are still challenges left, risks, threats. And it should be noted that none of these machines are switched in the network, none of them are using internet. It means that the risks related to cyber attacks and the vulnerability that might be related to this is ensured. So the current state of the election administration marks a critical turning point where the integration of electronic technologies is poised to revolutionize the voting process. So this innovation is expected to yield significant benefits, not only for the election environment, but for the entire nation, as electronic voting will enhance the credibility of vote counting process, minimize the risk of human error, and eliminate speculation around this topic. So given the magnitude and importance of these changes, all our efforts are focused on ensuring a successful implementation of this project. So the transition to the electronic interventions is considered a progressive step forward in election administration, as it significantly increases the effectiveness of the election administration, increases the speed and accuracy of the election results, and therefore builds trust in the election administration. Definitely, as Mr. Kask mentioned in his remarks, that it's not the guarantee of trust and credibility, but it's kind of a mechanism that in a long-term perspective can ensure the trust and credibility towards this process. So because the establishment of trust in the electronic system is a critical and significant challenge, as well as for most of the countries, as well as to Georgia. And the effectiveness of the electronic systems is contingent upon the trust bestowed upon by them individuals. Let me just with one sentence finalize. And establishing trust mandates a suitable social context and political consensus, and electronic technologies possesses inherent impartiality, which renders them reliable and effective in long run. So accordingly, and the important thing that we took into consideration when speaking and when someone manipulating about the election result, besides the fact that this machine, vote counting machine, has the possibility to transmit the results directly from the polling station to the Central Election Commission, avoiding passing the protocols to the Upper District Election Commission. Besides this, not to make this topic become the topic of manipulation, we have ensured this. We have a proper solution according to which we will be using tablets on the E-Day in the polls, and as soon as the machine prints out the preliminary results from the machine and it is spread and disseminated among all authorized people who are in the polling station, only after that the tablet scans, pictures the protocol that is transmitted in a minute in the CC database. And first time in this election, compared to the traditional one when we announced the preliminary results somewhere early in the morning, because it takes this time. It was the first time that in a 1.5 hour we had the preliminary result out of these all 10 municipalities where we conducted the elections. So these are the steps as well that we have ensured the safety of the results and its safe transmission to the Central Election Database in order to avoid particular manipulations in that regard, not to damage the whole important process to the elections.
It says a lot about the correctness of the procedure, doesn't it? The machine itself should be able to do the job.
Exactly, and important...
I'll come back to you, George.
Just one comment. Sorry, because this is very important, because there are countries that use vote countings that they have experienced in their national general elections, and they have proved that it should be credible. But in our case, as it is new and it is the first time that large-scale, I mean the upcoming 2024 elections, manual recounts will be provided in the process. Okay. We will have paper trails in all aspects of the use of technology, both in verification process as well as vote counting, and this was also one of the Venice Commission recommendations that was taken into consideration. And at the same time, we will conduct audits that will ensure additional guarantees for the transparency and publicity of the E-Day itself. Okay. Thank you very much.
Very much a transitional.
Sorry, I took
no,
time.
it's
but
fine.
there are plenty of things mentioned, but
yeah, but you've got to stop now. You've got to stop now.
Provide you some more clarification.
We'll get more from you, Gorgi, in a minute. Much. I do want to go to Barbara, though. Barbara's head of political rights, the political rights division at the Federal Chancellery here in Switzerland. Barbara, good example there of the structured approach, a transitional one as well. We've heard all sorts of experiences about e-voting, and we've heard about all sorts of concerns on the bigger digital platform as well. But I think you feel that there are one or two perhaps myths to be exposed here.
Thank you very much, David. Ladies and gentlemen, dear colleagues, as you are well aware, direct democracy is one of the key features, if not the key characteristic of the Swiss political system. Usually, the Swiss people are called to the polls every 3 months. Just to give you a figure, ever since 1848, we have voted on a federal level alone on over 660 proposals, or to look back at the last 50 years, 400 proposals. It's not to show off, but just to give you an idea of the sheer mass we are dealing with in Switzerland. So the frequency of the popular votes has obviously facilitated the early introduction of advanced and also unconditional postal voting. So the illegitimate voters receive their voter identification or voter card, their ballot papers, plus an information booklet, an official information booklet, 3 to 4 weeks prior to the actual voting day. So postal voting has been well established and also well trusted for many years now. It has helped to stabilize the voter turnout, and it's nowadays used by 90% of the voters who really participate in popular vote. But initially, postal voting was highly controversial. Is postal voting secure? Doesn't it open the doors to multiple forms of widespread abuse and fraud? Might the solemnness of the Voting Act itself be endangered? These were the kind of fears that were brought forward. And as usual in Switzerland, federalism came into play. So political rights are highly decentralized, which in my opinion is a very good thing. So Therese spoke about experiments on a local level. We say that the cantons serve as democratic laboratories. So coming back to the case of postal voting, while in some of the cantons unconditional postal voting has been adopted in the early 1990s, the latest canton was the canton of Ticino, who was very reluctant to introduce postal voting and only introduced it in 2015. So here again, widespread differences. So you might wonder why I'm telling you all this on a panel where we talk about technology and digitalization. So the point I'm trying to make is that long-established non-digital processes enjoy great trust and also acceptance in Switzerland. Newly digitalized processes, on the other hand, are often met with a certain reluctance and in some cases also some kind of mistrust. Nevertheless, it should be noted that digitalization has, of course, found its way also into many areas of the electronic or election and voting organization. In fact, many sub-processes are already digitalized, even within the so-called conventional or analog channels. I'm talking about plausibility checks, I'm talking about electronic counting of the ballots, but also tabulation, transmission of results, etc. etc. So electoral management bodies have to anticipate, of course, future challenges and risks. But at the same time, I feel it as my duty, not only as a civil servant, but also as an electoral management body, to identify possibilities and benefits for the eligible voters. And new procedures have to be well prepared, they have to be legally framed, and they take a decent amount of time when it comes to implementation. So security before speed would be the demand. So this said, the need for and the benefits of digital processes are not always recognized at first sight. I was made well aware of this point this morning when my dear colleague Thomas made his intervention about the advantages of e-voting. So I would like to get into that point. So as it has been mentioned before, Switzerland will restart to conduct e-voting trials and during the popular vote on the 18th of June after a 4-year suspension. So the trials will be very small scale, also a point that has been raised before. So only 3 out of 26 cantons and with a strong focus on Swiss voters living abroad, but also on people with a handicap. So Swiss residents with a handicap will profit from internet as an additional voting channel. So my first observation, or you may call it conclusion, is that e-voting is almost barrier-free. It's a mobile manner of voting, and the digital processes are highly inclusive, I find. So when it comes to not only out-of-country voting, but also when it comes to voters with mobility issues. People are getting older. I mean, that is a fact. So mobility issues, but also voters who are visually impaired. And it's also a highly accurate way of voting because there are no invalid votes. And when it comes to hundreds of candidates you have to put on a ballot, you might make mistakes. And here the accuracy helps also for Swiss residents, of course. And of course, it can be an advantage in times of crisis. We've all been through the pandemic, but it may also be helpful in natural disasters. Second conclusion is digitalization often leads to a re-examination and analysis of existing processes. This can provide the opportunity for improving and already established processes and even increasing their accuracy and security. And it took us 4 years to revise our legal framework, to re-establish the trial conditions, to improve the security of the system, and to conduct audits. We have developed a complete new approach to crisis management, to risk assessment, so all very helpful. Which leads me to the third observation, building trust is absolutely key. With regard to trust, we engaged in a dialogue with the scientific community and also the public. So a maximum of transparency is key. Access to the source code of the system, a bug bounty program we have installed, and also universally verifiable systems. These are all now legal requirements. So fourth observation, new technologies also have a strong influence on the duties and tasks carried out by the electoral management bodies. In the case of e-voting, the Federal Chancellery is now responsible for commissioning independent experts to examine e-voting systems and their operation. So this requires corresponding expertise and also resources within the EMBs. And here I can only refer to what Julia said this morning. So let me conclude. We have inclusive, mobile, transparent procedures at the gain of the eligible voters on one side. We see strict legal requirements, broader knowledge and know-how, new approaches to risk assessment and crisis management on the other side when it comes to EMBs. And these are the benefits and transformative advantages of new technologies I want to embrace. But at the same time, of course, it is important to never, ever lose sight of the complexity and also the dynamic challenges we are facing with said technologies when it comes to electoral procedures. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. You've given us 4 or maybe 5 reasons to be cheerful, if I can put it that way, for digital. But you had a 4-year suspension is a long time. What did you do in that intervening 4 years to educate, inform, raise literacy, build a sense of trust in a process that you were clearly determined at some point to bring back in again?
I would say I think the most important aspect of the approach we took and also the lessons we have learned from the previous trials was the fact that from an early day on, we really engaged in a dialogue with the scientific community. So we really wanted to embrace the knowledge, we wanted to work closely, and what we are trying to do is to really not leave it at that initial dialogue, but really go into and establish a constant dialogue. We also invested in building a scientific community. For example, the Bug Bounty program is also supposed to help building an actual community, and we have also been very transparent on the fact we will never ever come to the day where we can say now it's 100% safe and we'll have a rollout all over Switzerland. I don't believe in that. It's a dynamic challenge. So what we have established, and we will be working on that obviously on the long term also, it's evolving. We have a whole catalogue of measures, of improvements we are committed to make, and we are learning from every trial we're doing. So trial, it's a binding trial, it's not a test, I want to stress that out. But given the fact that we are called so often to the polls, helps us to improve with every trial, every 3 months. But this said, I'm well aware of the fact e-voting is not the solution to everything, it's an additional channel. And what works for Switzerland might not be a solution for another country.
Okay, thank you very much for that, Barbara. It sort of brings us back to the point that Suna was making as well, which is this battle between security and transparency. I'd like to bring that to you, Oliver, and you, Therese. How do you overcome that?
Yeah, it's a big challenge, I would say. We don't have any paper trail in Estonia. So log files of what's going on in all the computers or all the technology. First of all, well, encryption of votes given. So it's not possible to open the vote by anyone. So even if the system is not safe and then the votes go and spread somewhere, it's not possible to open them. So such kind of software means, and the key for decryption is divided into many pieces and divided among the members of the Central Election Commission and election organizers. The code of all the system which is used for internet voting is public, so everyone can check, all experts over the world can check whether there are some loopholes in the programs, in the software which is used. I think these are the main key elements. Concerning the secrecy of vote, if you give your vote to someone checking behind you, whom you are voting for, it's possible to revote and countless times, and even go on the very end to the polling station and give your paper ballot, so the internet vote won't be counted. I think these are the main key elements. Yeah, auditing also is one of the means. So it's a long list of solutions which we use. And what Barbara said about Switzerland, I think in Estonia also we can't say that it's 100% safe 100% without any possibilities of having some loopholes. But we follow what's going on, and if there would happen something, we will stop internet voting and address all the issues. So I
has that happened yet? Has there been a moment in which you needed to do that?
No, it hasn't happened. Well, certainly there might be the biggest dangers, I think, are shutting down the internet or let's say, which might come from foreign interference to stop some electricity, whatever. Fortunately, it hasn't come up yet, but there are always dangers using ICT or internet voting, as well as in polling stations voting. Just the dangers or risks are a bit different. Yeah, thanks.
Thank you very much. Teresa, can I put the same point to you about this security versus transparency?
This is an inherent problem in electoral management, that principles collide. Maybe it's an inherent problem in all kinds of sectors, but it certainly is here. And transparency collides with secrecy, secrecy collides with security, inclusion collides with integrity, in the sense that if the more groups you want to include in different ways, the more you're moving away from a controlled environment, which is the polling station. So the polling station is the tried and true kind of gold standard, best way that we know as a global community, a global democratic community, of keeping all of these principles somewhat contained. So it is somewhat transparent, it is secret for the voter, it is a controlled environment, you can see the ballot going in and so forth. But for all the reasons we've discussed, that ship has sailed, and all of these other ones. So voting at home is not, you have no guarantee that it's secret, and it is not a control, that you have no absolute guarantee that it's the person. So these things will collide. And there, I don't think there's an answer, but I want to speak to Irena's point again about capacity building and about the new generations of election officials at the central level and all the way out to the front lines, is they are going to be navigating these tensions and these colliding principles in real time. So the more we equip them with confidence and a set of parameters, the easier it will be, because there's no checklist that's going to help you navigate this in situations that you can't even imagine right now.
That issue about capacity and capacity building, Georgi, you talked about your Information Protection Centre. That comes at a cost, presumably, a significant one?
Information Protection Centre is launched for the purposes of to deal and to combat against disinformation. But what just Teresa mentioned in regards to the capacity building of the whole election administration, imagine there are 65,000 election administrators on the E-Day, and the technologies, and not everyone, maybe someone is good in elections, but does not have the technical skills, right? Because it needs proper skills to adequately respond to the how to say, issues that might raise on the E-Day. Accordingly, we are currently working on the proper activities and proper educational programs for our lower level commissions, but it's not enough, because we have also to raise the awareness within stakeholders, because local NGOs, civil service organizations, political parties, media, and everyone else, because it's just a simple example when speaking about electronic technologies, right? Immediately, somehow, it gives you a perception as we are implementing internet voting, right? When, according to the definition provided by the Council of Europe, electronic technology is the one when you use some of means of technologies, among them internet voting, right? And some of politicians still today say that it's not fully electronic elections because you don't have internet voting. Or one of the leading media journalists several days ago but not targetedly damage the environment because they affiliated these elections and this type of solution with some others that had just taken place in another country. And accordingly, we have to raise the awareness in society. Voter education is very important in that regard because to raise the trust toward this process, yes, definitely election E-Day is pretty much important in this regard. They will come, they will see. And even this time, first time, we have conducted survey, exit polls on our own resources, and we have asked voters how satisfied they were with the services that we have introduced them these elections just 1 week ago. And out of 4,700 voters questioned, in 96%, they consider it more safe, more secure, more simple, and they were satisfied with the services they have. So it means that the society and voters are ready to accept the services. But this is on the one hand, and on the other hand, there are risks related to the disinformation and targeted discreditation campaigns in order to damage the whole positive process and electoral reform that is ongoing in the country. But definitely, educational programs, information campaigns, awareness-raising campaigns is #1 priority in our action plan, in our strategic action plan that we are pretty much targeted, and with the support of our international partners, among them Council of Europe, Office in Georgia, and some other international partners are already deeply engaged and in partnership with the election administration of Georgia in order to support all these educational programs that is going ahead to be in the rest of 1.5 year period that is left before the general elections. By the way, I will take the opportunity and would like to invite you and to mark in your calendars for the next year general elections that will take place at the end of October to come as an international observers within the competencies and authorities of your organizations, because international observation missions' role in this part and your objective findings and your recommendations will have crucial importance to the development of Georgian elections and democracy in Georgia. Thank you very much.
Okay, Georgia, thank you. And I want to come to the ways of successfully combating disinformation in just a moment through technology. But Barbara, before we do that, Georgi gave a very clear picture there. There is a lot of education, raising awareness, raising literacy values that is the Georgian approach. I think the Swiss approach is you sort it out for yourself, isn't it? That seems to be the way.
Thank you very much, David. Of course, there is also education, I mean, for example, in schools, but on the other hand, I would say that voter information is key. So there, I said that Swiss voters receive prior to voting day an information booklet, an official information booklet, and this information booklet is based on legal requirements. So our whole framework is really, our legal framework is very strict, and it only leaves a very narrow path to the authorities. But
and
the
sorry,
trust,
that information booklet contains what? The
pros and the cons.
Right.
The pros and the cons, and also the committee that sponsors, for example, a referendum, has 2 entire pages to present its views, its arguments, and it goes uncensored. So even if there are really exaggerations and everything, it will be printed and it is handed out to the voters. So information really is key. At the same time, I think trust in the authorities is an important thing, but trust is not a one-way street when it comes to voting. So the Swiss authorities also have a high level of trust in their eligible voters. So in sending out the ballot papers, we are trusting the individual citizen that he or her really regards it as a duty to participate. In one canton, you're even fined if you don't participate in a popular vote, and that there is no family voting. Discussing, of course, subjects, yes, but so family voting is not really an issue in Switzerland, and we also trust that the voter takes a well-informed decision before casting his or her vote.
And can I just ask you briefly on that issue, who compiles the pros and the cons pages? Who puts that together?
It's the federal government. But at the same time, the government has to take into consideration the minorities. So, for example, arguments that have brought forward by a minority in Parliament, they have to be taken into account. So the information needs to be objective. Propaganda is not allowed. It's objective information. It doesn't have to be neutral, because there is no such thing as neutrality when it comes down to voting. But it has to be objective.
Okay, really interesting. Thank you. Suna, I know you wanted to come in.
Yes, thank you. Well, I mean, I'm so in awe of the idea that trust is not a one-way street. I had to respond to that first. I wanted to respond to Georgie, but first is that, yes, we need to also trust our electorate and have faith in them being able to make good decisions. And I think if politicians don't have that faith in the voters, then why would the voters have that faith in the politicians that they're able to take good decisions? It's always a two-way street. So I think it's just a really important point that should be emphasized. But I wanted to take an example comparable to yours that I think is a little less positive. And I am co-rapporteur actually with my colleague here, Maria Valentina, who had an intervention here earlier on the post-monitoring dialogue of the Council of Europe with the state of Bulgaria. And there they've had some ups and downs when it comes to voting machines in their voting process. So when I was there monitoring, I think it was the 5th election in 2 years or 18 months or something, very, very short amount of time, they had moved almost exclusively to electronic voting machines, which in the experience of the CEC meant a lot less possibility for voter buying, which was a problem. People would buy the votes of citizens, and they would be able to prove that they voted the right way by taking a picture of the ballot. So what the use of these electronic voting machines did was remove the possibility of taking a picture of your ballot, because you are voting out in the open at this screen machine where nobody can see what's on your screen, but everybody can see you and what you know, that you are clicking the screen but not taking a picture of your ballot. And then in the next immediate election, which I unfortunately couldn't attend, but I was there, the plans were, oh, we will go back a little bit because people don't trust it, people don't really consider it to be a safe way, even though it showed that it actually worked against voter fraud, against this kind of mass-scale voter buying that they had a problem with. So one of the lessons that I thought could be learned from there is, first of all, I also sensed quite a resentment, or not a resentment, but more of a reluctance when we as observers asked, how about an independent audit to increase trust in these machines? How about this kind of more added access of independent bodies that can look into the whole process? And there seemed to be a little bit of a lack of understanding why that was important. So I really commend the Georgian approach of, first of all, having a trial run, and then also having all of these layers and levels of access to the whole procedure and ability to audit and ability to recount and everything, especially in the first go, to instill trust in the whole procedure so that you can double check and triple check that these machines are not being used to negatively impact the safety and security of the vote in any way. And I think that's a really important way of doing it. Just like Barbara you also mentioned this, taking things slow and having security go beyond being fast or, hurrying to get there.
Yeah.
And I think that's a really important step if we want to integrate technologies which have a great potential of making, electoral processes more efficient and more accessible for everybody. We do need to take it slow so that we can then go very fast, hopefully, in the future.
At some point, despite 4-year suspensions from time to time. I'm going to open it up to the floor as well in just a moment, but I do want to touch on one other issue, because Barbara, you used the word objectivity, really critically important. We heard earlier about the challenges of artificial intelligence, AI, and the threat that poses. And I just want to get some view, perhaps I could start with you, Therese, on how AI can help, in fact, to undermine foreign interference, to undermine fake information, to serve rather than just be seen as a threat. If I may put you on the spot.
I think where AI is going to be helpful, I don't know if I can connect those two things immediately, just because the problem sometimes with AI is that you're not exactly sure what it's been trained on. And I think that we all have to be very, very aware of that and walk in not expecting solutions to things like foreign interference from AI. But where AI will be a tool is that as electoral authorities, and I want to pick up on the lessons learned point that came up, especially through Barbara's intervention, is that we need to understand why people are distrustful or who isn't voting, why there's invalid ballots, and just try those lessons learned exercise to understand what happened. I think that's where this kind of evidence gathering in a mass way can become much, much more efficient to be able to inform decisions moving forward. So I think that's a very, this lessons learned and constantly this, if we are going to be in a dynamic space, as Barbara calls it, then pulling in intelligence all the time will be part of that, and artificial intelligence will be part of that story.
Okay, thank you very much. Anyone else want to remark on that? Are you happy to leave that? We'll leave that. Yes, Barbara?
Yeah, maybe just one point when it comes to disinformation. I think IA can help to detect patterns. And I think it's very important to detect the patterns, debunk them also, and it will also help to pre-bunk, so to leave as little vacuum as possible for disinformation.
Yeah, thank you very much for that. So I'd like to get our first intervention now from Cécile Emen. Cécile, thank you.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much indeed. I'll be speaking French. I apologize in advance for repeating things that have already been said. To be honest, I think everything's already been said. All viewpoints have been made clear. But I did want to take the floor just to make a few general comments. When thinking about the digital transition, the move to the digital era, we're talking about a period that we are living through right now. And we see increasing impacts of that in a broad range of sectors. We know that digital technology and AI can be used for good or for ill. And we therefore must think about that as something that may potentially happen within electoral processes. Opening up to e-voting is something that might seem very positive, and people may think that the positive side of that would outweigh the negative side. As I see it, the purpose is very clear. We want to streamline and simplify our electoral processes. We want to increase participation in elections. And perhaps I don't entirely agree with one of the panelists on that point, who referred to increasing participation as not being a top priority. But I also think we need to ensure that people have more trust in the outcome of elections, that they're seen as being more reliable. That's, I think, another very good outcome. And we have more than 650,000 people living in Luxembourg. More than 100,000 also live abroad, and they are in 113 different countries all over the world. world. For them, e-voting could be something that could be very useful indeed. It could certainly facilitate their participation in elections. We don't have much experience with this ourselves, but during French elections, we saw that 27,000 French nationals on the list held by consular authorities in Luxembourg could use e-voting to elect members for their particular area, for their constituency, which includes Benelux. So, even if I don't want to be a doom-monger about this, I do know that there are concerns, and we've heard a lot about them. We know that many public institutions have already been targets for cyber attacks, and I'm sure that electoral bodies will also find themselves targeted by those who make ill use of digital progress. I therefore understand why there is some mistrust or even distrust among voters, and I understand that that might actually lead to the very opposite of what we are hoping for. It might actually lead to a drop in participation in elections, and it might even lead people to call the results of elections into question. So, although things seem possible, there are serious negative potential. There is serious negative potential in this use, and we must not underestimate the challenge that we face. We note that, for instance, President Biden, when he stands again in 2024, will have to deal with this issue. And we have seen a recent video that has been circulated and that has already had an impact on public opinion there. And we therefore must be very much aware of what, in fact, all of this can do in terms of influencing people's views and therefore influencing the way that they vote. I think we have to look very carefully at all of these issues and all of the potential risks. We need to take tangible steps to counter those risks, and we must be vigilant about emerging technologies and emerging methods of use of those technologies that might, in fact, mean that we need to be constantly re-evaluating the situation. I would urge that we work with civil society, the Venice Commission and academic circles in order to produce some kind of regulatory framework for all of this. As we move into the digital era, we need democratic governance of AI. We need a legally binding framework that fully respects democratic principles. We need to create such a framework. We also need to have a benchmark for any future use of e-voting in elections. And I therefore commend the idea of including in the outcome declaration for the 4th summit the Reykjavik principles for democracy that refer to international standards for the organization of elections and referenda, and also refer to giving priority to finalizing a framework convention within the auspices of the Council of Europe on AI. I think that's something we really need. That brings me to the end of my comments, and I'm very happy indeed that such an important issue could be discussed during our work here today.
I'm going to run through a few more because we've got some cards coming up. People are keen to get involved. First of all, Armen Spatyan from Armenia. He's not here. Oh, I see. No. Fine. Doesn't matter. Let me ask Anna Nyqvist. Would you like to take the floor? Thank you.
Yes. Thank you very much, and thank you very much to the Swiss Parliament and to the Council of Europe for organizing this and inviting us from EMBs. And I represent the Swedish Election Authority, and actually I really appreciate what this panel has said, and I would like to echo everything that Therese already said, which describes the circumstances that an EMB works in today. I think that every election system has its weaknesses. In Sweden, the people trust in the election system very very much. The election system actually has the highest trust of every institution in the society, 78% in the last poll. But that does not mean that we have nothing to change. And when I visit other countries, I always, I should say, find something in their election system which I don't trust. I think it's really strange, although they are very professional. And I think that everyone who visits Sweden thinks that we have really strange things, that how can you trust them, but still 78% do. But we have lots of challenges, and in Sweden we have paper-based voting only, and we will probably have that for a long time. But we have problems with the lack of paper, the lack of spare parts during an election. I'm not sure if our postal company will not have the premises, and we can't carry out our elections in the same way we do today in 10 or 15 years, I think. And that's why, which the panel and the last panel also pointed out, the EMBs need to be a strong partner in the center of the election process and cooperate with the postal companies and every partner involved in the process. And also when it comes to security, we don't live in an isolated place anymore. So even if we think that the Swedish system is really safe, which it is, of course, when it's an election in the US, we get lots of emails and contacts on social media from voters in Sweden who say, oh, do we use the same company as they do in the US? Or we don't use any company at all. But still, we need to change our process when the world is changing. And that's why this kind of cooperation between EMBs and building the capacity for EMBs is so important. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. Can I just ask a simple, maybe a stupid question, I don't know, but you said you have an issue of a lack of paper. Literally?
Yeah. In Sweden, the last election we used, I think it was 89.2 tons of paper, and there was a big lack of paper in the world during the pandemic. We also have sustainability issues, so we have authorities who can put constraints on how much paper we can produce in a short time. So it's a really big problem for us to have the paper that we need in a sustainable way.
So there is a sustainability pressure there to move digital. That's really interesting. Thank you very much for that. Could I ask Alexandra Belinci for your intervention? Thanks, Alex.
Oui, merci David.
Thank you, David. I would also like to thank all of the panelists for sharing their experiences with us. Thank you very much indeed. As we see it, alternative voting procedures and electronic voting procedures really are much more risky than they are advantageous for us. We think that information campaigns are really going to be required in order to convince people that there are pros to moving to electronic voting rather than just cons. We must also, if we're going to go down this path, convince those who are involved in organizing elections that this is somehow going to make their lives easier as well. The issue of participation in elections, this is first and foremost the responsibility of political parties and candidates rather than the electoral bodies themselves, the bodies that run elections. It's up to them to make their programs and policies so attractive that people want to vote for them. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed for that. Are there any, Armen, you're with us again. Please, if you'd like to make your intervention, not too long. If we can keep it quite tight, that would be great. Thank you.
Great, thank you, David. I will try to be short because I want to share with Armenian experience. And I don't know, you know or not, we use lots of technologies: internet voting, VAD machines, video typing, live video typing from precincts, and so on, yes? And I want to like to invite your attention what we see, what we have as advantages and disadvantages. About internet voting, yes, we use it from 2012, and but it is not so popular because it is only for diplomatic persons and the members of their families. It is more or less for about 1,000 people. And sometimes we attacked each problem to count the results during the counting of results. It was a period when attacked our website of Central Electoral Commission. So and for this reason, we limited the access of site of CEC website. And after then, it was only 15 minutes. But during the dispute of Constitutional Court, we had to speak about that hours, about 15 minutes. We spoke hours. So what I want to mention, invite your attention to evidence how we can prove the election results. If it is precinct, we can recount, for example, it. We can recount in Territorial Election Commission, even CEC, even, I don't know, court, and it's archive. But we don't have evidence if we should recount, if we should prove the right of results. Another thing, because we are trying now to oversee digital campaign, it's another challenge of electoral bodies and electoral systems, because it is really very big challenge, and you can't ignore it, and you can't oversee it, because there are lots of fakes, there are lots of, I don't know, problems that you will face. And yes, and another things. Mr. Kask spoke about the observation that is easier observed. So we are using the video typing, live video typing from each precinct, and it is really easily now to observe, not from observers, classical observers, but from public, from voter, from political parties, from international observation missions also. And it's recorded as well.
I'm going to have to stop you there.
Just one
very brief, if you can, please.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Just one more advantage which we try to do: digitalization of training of all of level of administrations of election bodies. So thank you. Yes, I should be briefly, or I would share more advantages and the disadvantages, because I can't speak about VAD, for example. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for a very good talk, for a good conversation and good topic.
Thank you very much indeed. I'm sorry to cut you short, but I did want to get the view from another Central Electoral Commission, and Mary Claire O'Sullivan. Thank you.
So we're possibly the youngest electoral commission in the room, in that we were only set up on the 9th of February 2023. So I want to thank the organisers. It's been really informative being here, and I have a lot to take back to my colleagues in Ireland. One of the areas that we will be focusing on quite strongly is misinformation and disinformation, and I was quite interested in what Georgie was talking about in terms of the Information Protection Centre. And in our legislation, there's a differentiation made between electoral process information, which is how the election is conducted, the rules, where's the polling station, and broader electoral information about things like the information, the topics, the candidates and the parties. And I wondered whether Georgie's Information Protection Centre focuses more or less on the process or more broadly, and I suppose also, I'm sure other members of the panel may have thoughts on the extent to which, you know, intervening in the broader way is deliverable, and, you know, maybe examples they're aware of in that context.
Thank you very much for that. Georgie, could I start with you then?
Yes, sure. So, in 2020, we had general parliamentarian elections, and we faced and experienced a huge targeted discreditation campaign that nearly led the society to the revolution or destabilization in the country that led us to the deep polarization. Since that, it's already 2 years that I'm occupying this position. I'm as a chairperson, but besides this, I've been in the election system during 15 years. By that time, my predecessor was occupying this position, and she nearly personally died because of the huge use of defamation, hate speech, disinformation, and so on and so forth. And still today, we have this somehow left this bad reputation that was the result of this 2020 campaign. This led us to think about, to identify proper mechanisms in order to deal with such orchestrated disinformation and targeted campaigns, right? Definitely, Information Protection Centre is not enough in order to fully deal with this issue. And that's why I have raised the fact, the research from IDEA that it's not only Georgia and it's not some of our countries presented here who are the victims of discreditation and disinformation, right? We have to think about proper solutions that could significantly support this process to avoid us, first of all, election management bodies to be led to the mistrust and destroying their reputation, but the whole election environment itself. Because I think that as democracies, the joint work, like it is with the elections, right? This is the joint responsibility of media, of CSOs, of international partners, of politicians and political parties itself, right? So, because if you are not satisfied with the results, everyone is trying to find the proper justification for the electorate in order, and always election management bodies are becoming the victims and law fans in that side, right? But another policy that we have now adopted in order to deal with such campaigns is that our British colleagues and British experts are now involved in this part, that to provide intensive information campaigns and to provide the progress, to provide the transformation, and to be always on the top in the news so that society will be always updated with all activities, all things that you do in that regard. These can significantly support also the process with in addition with the whatever is done by the Information Protection Centre. But sometimes we are also criticized having revealed some information that was spread by someone else, it doesn't matter, that we are not on a good way, what is our methodology, how we have identified it to be false and fake information and so forth, and even sometimes we have public debates in that regard. But finally, it should be mentioned that already some of EMBs have taken this practice from us. They have implemented such information protection centers in their countries, but still there are plenty of things to do in order to deal with these malign practices that is called disinformation, because within the social era, when the boundaries are not limited and the information can be spread in just a few seconds and can reach the end of the world. So very quickly it's difficult to manage.
Georgi, thank you for addressing that. No, I haven't got time. Sorry, I haven't got time. We've got a closing ceremony to get through in a minute, but thank you. Because I do want to give a very quick moment to our other panellists just to round off before Suna can conclude. Oliver, you had a quick word.
Yeah, thank you. Just two small issues. First of all, close cooperation with civil society, independent assessment of all the electoral procedures, not just some kind of listening to the viewpoints from the Central Election Commission or other election management bodies is important in order to guarantee the trust in election management. And also concerning the fight against cyber attacks towards electoral system, I think it's important not to have just some kind of solutions within the election management bodies, but it has to be an overall one concerning all the state institutions, and it's important to build capacities beforehand, not just during the electoral period. So cooperation in different fields is very important, which I conclude from what was said. Yeah, thank you.
Oliver, thank you. Therese, a quick word.
Just a quick rule of thumb, not always possible, but because new technology is always more distrusted than old technology and is more vulnerable, just a rule of thumb is 3 electoral cycles for a reform. I know there's not always time for it, but that first cycle to have a bit of a sense and to gauge and what are people thinking and to socialize it. Second electoral cycle to test, and then only in the third to roll out. And I think that helps with avoiding some of the unintended consequences of introducing technology too quickly.
Thank you very much. Some have had more than 3, but in getting to that point. And Barbara, thank you.
Thank you very much. I think I've said my piece on countering disinformation, so I would really like to use my time left to maybe make some conclusions on the theme we've all been discussing very briefly. So voting in times of crisis, what my take-home messages are, I think, established and stable processes and trust in the authorities and the voters are crucial in times of crisis especially. Remote voting channels and forms of advanced voting are a complete game changer. I'm referring to, I think it was Eric who said that yesterday. The decentralized approach is an important pillar and also safeguard in times of crisis. I think interagency collaboration is key. Massimo has pointed that out yesterday on the panel, and I would like to enlarge it on international cooperation as building networks like we did the last 2 days. And I think it's so worth investing in building resilience, because robustness at the end of the day really pays off. And I think we all got so many messages now, and we have a to-do list as legislatures as well, and adapt maybe our legal frameworks to future crises to come, because there will be, as Tara's rightly said so.
Every day there's another one. Barbara, thank you very much indeed for that. Well, Suna, you've chaired 2 sessions. We've had the bad, we've had the good. It's an awful lot to pull together in 2 minutes, but that's your challenge.
Thank you for the challenge, David. I'll try to deliver. So, wrapping up, I think one of the key messages I heard from Oliver was that, there are many benefits with e-voting, in particular that the location of the voter doesn't matter, and also that observation of the elections are made easier like that. And I think there it's important to highlight the importance of open source, so that anyone that wants to check the code, wants to check the source code, can check the source code. This is something to enable public trust in these kinds of procedures. Now, also perhaps, a little Icelandic anecdote. We have this almost national anthem of "it'll be okay," which is that we don't tend to plan a lot, and we say what is called "þetta reddast," which is, it'll fix itself. But in the terms of e-voting, this is something that you should not ascribe to, and you should really plan ahead. This is something that I feel very strongly from this panel, from all of our panelists, that preparation is key. Although I must add a little, perhaps, hope for the future, or different perspective in the terms that new technology is always less trusted than the old. I'm not sure that that entirely applies to the younger generation, which tends to distrust older technology and be excited to try the new one. Not everyone is fearful of technology, and a lot of people embrace it and really believe in it and are sometimes even a little naively trustful of it. And final remarks, I think it's very important to highlight again that trust is not a one-way street. And if we are to take the lessons that we have from this panel, is first of all, this informed electorate that Switzerland relies its very many and numerous elections on to be able to, get the public to basically participate a lot more actively in decision-making. This is one way of showing that you trust the electorate. The fact that you only let the electorate decide on who gets to run the country every 4 or 5 years, it indicates that you don't trust the electorate to take wise decisions about how their society is run on a day-to-day basis. So what I feel is that if we manage to utilize the technologies of e-voting and these technologies that we see emerging, we can use them both to increase the rate of elections, increase the public's participation in decision-making. And I think with that, by giving the public more responsibility and more trust in decision-making, we will also get a more engaged and trustful and, democratic public, because they are being trusted with bigger decisions. And that's something that I think our future democracy should look like. And hopefully, technology can help us with that instead of hinder. Thank you.
Indeed. Suna, thank you very much indeed for wrapping that up so beautifully. First of all, then, could I just ask you to thank our panel for their contributions this morning? And can I also say there are, once again, plenty of photos of no doubt all of you on the website. Do have a look, see if there's something you might want to grab from there. We've spent the whole of today talking about digitalization. Well, you can get out and tweet and digitize away about the event, because I think it's important to get the message out rather than hold this incredible depth of expertise over the last 2 days to ourselves. So please do share your views on how the conference itself has run. And thank you for all your participation as well. My job now is to ask Damien Cotier to take to the floor once again for our closing session. Thank you very much. Huh? Yeah, you stay there.
Thank you very much, dear David. Thank you very much to the panelists. Chers collègues, cela nous amène à la...
Colleagues, we have now arrived at the end of this conference, the closing ceremony. It's a pleasure for me to wish a warm welcome to our Minister of State for Foreign Affairs for Switzerland, who's next to me now. Despina isn't here at the moment. We can tell her that Switzerland isn't always complying with the Parliamentary Assembly rules, especially with regard to gender parity for Secretaries of State, because the 5 Secretaries of State in Switzerland are all women. And we're delighted about this. It's usually the other way around, that they're all men and not women, but in Switzerland it's not the case at all. So things can, of course, move in very much the right direction. So thank you very much indeed, Madam Secretary of State, for joining us. I'd like to give the floor, first of all, to our General Rapporteur, who's going to give us a sort of a wrapping up of the conference, an overview of what's happened over the past 2 days. It's going to be a difficult task, of course. It's been a very rich conference, and we've handed out, of course, a draft final declaration for the conference as well, which we can adopt that afterwards. Right, so you have the floor.
Well, thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen, excellencies. It is indeed very difficult to summarize such a rich exchange of views we have had in the course of last 2 days. Actually, it was much easier to find the fish on the picture. I did, but thanks to the support of some people. Now, I do realize that I'm one of the last obstacles in your ability to explore the beauty of the city of Bern. But in order to speed things up a bit and also not to lose these important views and ideas, I prepared a draft declaration which I hope is available for everyone now to read in full. At the same time, I also would like to share with you a shorter summary of what I believe are some of the important points discussed during the conference. Free and fair elections are the foundations on which our democracies are built. Yet we face dramatic challenges ranging from health pandemics to the return of full-scale war to Europe, terror attacks, foreign intervention in elections and natural disasters. While as it is promised new ways of voting, they also bring dangers as AI and cyber tools expand the scope for disinformation and manipulation prior to elections. During the first session yesterday, we discussed the impact of COVID-19 on elections. The pandemic challenged fundamental rights, electoral norms and practices. It highlighted serious gaps in legal frameworks and challenged numerous countries to rethink how to deliver safe, technically sound and credible elections. Notwithstanding these challenges, COVID-19 also presented opportunities for positive change and innovation. We call on EMBs to conduct systematic reviews of the rules and procedures, focusing on resilience, agility, and adaptability. Consultative and transparent processes have proved to be critical for election-related decision-making. These processes should include all affected stakeholders, in particular public authorities, political parties, CSOs, and be transparent to the media and the wider public. We also spoke about election observation, which is an integral part of the transparency of electoral processes. It was clearly affected by the physical absence of observers for elections held during the COVID-19 pandemic due to the health and security reasons. However, the pandemic also presented innovations such as remote and online monitoring, which were introduced to compensate to the limited presence on the ground and underline the need to develop a joint framework on how election observation missions should approach emergency situations. In yesterday's second session, we focused on how natural disasters distort our elections. It is clear that our planet is suffering from the negative effects of the climate crisis, which makes certain natural disasters more frequent and their consequences more devastating. We need to revise our regulation measures to adapt to these crises. When it comes to their impact on political stability, we need to adopt strategies for risk management prior to disasters and crisis management once they have occurred. We therefore call on governments to identify the possible external hazards affecting electoral processes. This is important in order to determine the appropriate state agencies, local and regional administrations that will have the mandates, skill sets and resources to act during this crisis. A single framework that combines best practices from risk management, resilience building and crisis management further strengthen a whole society approach to the delivery of elections during or after emergencies. In the third session yesterday, we discussed the impact of war on elections. We recognize that elections held amid ongoing armed conflicts are rare, as it is nearly impossible to meet international democratic standards in such circumstances. Armed conflicts generate population displacement both within and outside countries. We underline the need for a roadmap defining minimum conditions for calling elections after a state of emergency is lifted, as well as actions that ensure that they remain as democratic as possible. Security considerations and measures to protect the rights to life, health and security need careful balancing against the right to political participation and the integrity of electoral processes. Such a roadmap would help generate broader political consensus on the timing and other conditions for holding post-war elections. We stand united against Russia's war of aggression against Ukraine and call on our governments to continue providing full support to Ukraine. Once the guns fall silent, it will be important to uphold the integrity of elections to be held in Ukraine at all levels of elected offices, including ample resources to mitigate the huge impact of the war. For its part, the Council of Europe, in cooperation with the international community, will support its member state Ukraine in ensuring that the necessary preconditions for the elections in the post-war period are met. This morning, our last session focused on the impact of AI and ICTs on our elections, discussing the challenges as well as the opportunities. Our elections are not only threatened by physical warfare, but also by hybrid wars. We have experienced foreign electoral interference in several countries by foreign and domestic actors. We call on our governments to step up the fight against disinformation and propaganda, which are aimed at undermining our democratic institutions. Interagency cooperation is a prerequisite for countering such interference. We call on EMBs and other relevant actors to strengthen their own capacity to track, analyze and anticipate cyber attacks and disinformation. EMBs should also enhance their communication and voter education strategies on information integrity and work closely with civil society, education institutions and media actors. With the expanded use and dependency on ICTs, the risks of manipulation of our elections grow. Cyber attacks can undermine the legitimacy of elections and the mechanisms to protect them. We call on EMBs and other relevant actors to strengthen cybersecurity and protect critical infrastructures essential for the conduct of elections. Internet-connected systems, networks, software, and data from unauthorized exploitation, including the security of online election technologies. While AI contributes to the automation of data analysis and has the potential to improve and support the upholding of democratic values and processes, including elections, its use, in particular due to algorithms applied in social media, can contribute to social polarization, resulting in the formation of separate groups that no longer speak to each other and find themselves increasingly in conflict with one another. Understanding these dynamics is fundamental for EMBs and practitioners to safeguard the integrity and credibility of electoral processes. However, we also recognize the benefits of ICTs and call on EMBs to upgrade their capacities to harness their use in diverse ways, learning from their experience during the pandemic and re-evaluating long-established electoral procedures and practices to sustain advances and innovations in the next electoral cycles. We therefore call on heads of states and governments to reaffirm their commitment to take all measures to fight undue interference and ensure free and fair elections as a means to elect independent and effective parliaments and democratic institutions, consolidate pluralistic democracy, prevent and resist democratic backsliding, including in situations of emergency, crisis, and armed conflicts. Thank you very much. Now, I understand that, of course, it was not possible to include all of the views. Therefore, if there are any people who would like to make perhaps general comments about the declaration, I think maybe we can invite them to speak. Otherwise, I will be available here for any of you to bring your more specific points, and I will be happy to include them to the declaration which will be posted on the website after the conference. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much indeed to our General Rapporteur for this work and this very difficult task that you had, which you carried out most brilliantly, in fact, to sum up the past 2 days of this conference. Of course, we don't want to open up a general debate on this matter. Otherwise, I think our lunch will get cold. But if there are any comments that people are very keen to make, of course, please contact our rapporteur, our General Rapporteur, and changes, if need be, could be made to the final declaration. This final declaration will be adopted in Parliament this afternoon. Can I assume that we can adopt this declaration, please? That's the case. Thank you very much indeed, and thank you to our General Rapporteur. Thank you for everyone that's worked on this. I think these 2 past days of the conference have shown one thing very clearly. It's just how different how different people are that are working here. We have people from the Parliamentary Assembly, the Congress of Local and Regional Authorities, the Venice Commission, the European Court of Human Rights, special committees and other partners as well. Let's not forget how important it is to develop partnerships with other organizations or international organizations, a number of whom have been represented here today, and how important it is to coordinate your work with them, especially when it comes to election observation missions. But not only when these missions are being carried out, also throughout the whole electoral process. That's the run-up to it, the actual holding of the elections, and the period after it as well. I feel quite emotional, actually, I have to say, because I do remember that on the 10th of May, in 1948, 75 years ago here today, this is the time when the Congress of The Hague was finished, and Denis de Rougemont, as I was saying yesterday, read out the message to the Europeans, and we know that this message did have a follow-up because it resulted in the creation of the Council of Europe and the European Court of Human Rights and the European Convention on Human Rights, and it also led to the creation indirectly of the European Union and all the different principles and values enshrined in this declaration. So this, and in the Schuman Declaration as well. So the 10th of May is a very important date, a key milestone back in 1948, and now all these years later on, 75 years later, now we're going to be asked to adopt the Bern Declaration, which, if you like, a follow-up to this initial declaration. It's not a message to all Europeans, but it's a message on the European democracy, on how elections can be organized to preserve and maintain this democracy. And I think it's certainly something that, as a result of a pure coincidence in terms of our meeting schedule, that we're having this meeting on this very day when 75 years ago such an important declaration was made. We hope this historical moment will continue until next week when the summit is going to be held in Reykjavik and our head of state and government will be meeting. You'll be there along with the president of the Swiss Confederation, Madam Secretary of State. You'll be keeping a watchful eye on this. You are, of course, the Secretary of State for Foreign Affairs for Switzerland, and you're doing us the honour of being with us for the closing session of this conference. Thank you very much indeed. Let me give you the floor now.
Voilà. Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you very much indeed, President. Ladies and gentlemen, members of the Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe, it's an honour for me to speak to you at the end of 2 days of work on elections in times of crisis and more generally on democracy. I'm delighted that you are here in this particular place, which is almost uniquely suited to the organisation of such a conference. Indeed, Switzerland is known for its long tradition of democracy. We are gathered in the parliamentary chamber, and we are very much at the heart of Swiss democracy, one of the cornerstones of Swiss democracy. Now, recent events have reminded us once again that we are not immune to natural disasters, nor to health crises, nor to war, and nor to armed conflict, even in our own region, that is the region of Europe. All these developments, together with the rise of authoritarianism, are putting our model of democracy under strain. The COVID-19 crisis, because of its unpredictability, has at times highlighted shortcomings in our legal frameworks. It has also, in some cases, led to measures being taken that restrict our fundamental rights and freedoms, as well as established electoral practices. Natural disasters, which are increasingly frequent in the context of climate change, create human tragedies and also hamper the proper conduct of elections. Finally, it is obvious that wars and armed conflicts severely limit the capacity of states to carry out their democratic processes, as well as to guarantee some of the fundamental rights of their population, that is, the right to life, the right to health, and the right to security. These developments mean that we need to start giving thought on how we can best build resilient, flexible, open, and transparent systems. Now, in these discussions, the use of information and new technologies is becoming increasingly important. Sometimes it is even seen as a miracle solution. Of course, these technologies promise progress when it comes to defending and promoting our political rights. However, these technologies are not without risk. Disinformation, cyber attacks, and electoral interference are also a consequence. Here too, we cannot afford to remain as bystanders. We must step up our efforts to develop international standards which will enable us to ensure the integrity of our democratic and electoral systems. The work being carried out by the Council of Europe's Committee on Artificial Intelligence, chaired by Switzerland, aims to offer a pragmatic response to these developments. It also demonstrates the Council of Europe's capacity to respond to the challenges of the 21st century. Now, of course, the establishment of a vibrant democracy, of which elections are a key part, is a lengthy and difficult process. However, democracy must prevail to guarantee justice and freedom for all individuals. This belief is at the heart of Switzerland's commitments. Democracy not only characterizes our national political system, but promoting democracy is also a central objective of our foreign policy, as set out in our Constitution. We firmly believe that defending, supporting and promoting democracy are the foundations of a stable and prosperous society. Ladies and gentlemen, since Switzerland joined the Council of Europe on the 6th of May 1963, 60 years ago, the Council of Europe has become a key organization for Switzerland. Through the Council of Europe, Switzerland plays a full part in the construction and development of Europe. Its work has led to the modernization of the rule of law, as well as the human rights protection system in Switzerland, as well as within its 45 other member states. The system of the European Convention on Human Rights has made an important contribution to the implementation of a law-based European social order, which is guaranteed by the European Court of Human Rights. The recent submission of Kosovo's application for membership to the Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe, the first step on its path to membership, to which Switzerland is committed, should also help contribute to this. The Council of Europe allows us to unite around common values that it embraces like no other organization, values that are democracy, human rights, and the rule of law. The reaffirmation of this bedrock that unites us is particularly important at a time when Russia's military aggression against Ukraine is throwing up fundamental challenges to our continent. Supporting Ukraine is fully in line with the principles of the Council of Europe. This support will form the backdrop to the Council of Europe summit, which is going to be held next week in Reykjavik, and where Switzerland will be represented by the President of the Swiss Confederation, Alain Berset. The Reykjavik summit is only the fourth in the history of the organization, So expectations are therefore very high. At this decisive moment, we must give the Council of Europe an ambitious new vision, a new political impetus. In this way, it will be able to preserve its specific features and find its role in the new Europe of the 21st century. For Switzerland, this means, in particular, ensuring that the Council of Europe's pan-European nature is maintained. It also requires clear and strong support for the European Convention on Human Rights system, as well as a stronger emphasis on the Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe. A few days before the Reykjavik summit, I think it was a particularly good time to bring together representatives of the parliaments of member states. I have no doubt that our discussions here and in Reykjavik will help provide a strong political impetus to the Council of Europe, whose expertise is of paramount importance to promote our values, in particular democracy, human rights and the rule of law. Thank you very much indeed for your attention.
So, ladies and gentlemen, that brings us to the end of our conference. We have the declaration, the final declaration from the Bern conference that we have just adopted. But this is something that mustn't just remain on paper. This must lead to action, to modifications of our procedures. Something must happen because of this. We must think about changing the way we work in the Parliamentary Assembly within the Committee of Ministers. I very much hope it will also have an impact on the discussion to take place among heads of state and government in Reykjavik next week, and also that it will be discussed in other bodies of the Council of Europe and in other international organizations. That's very much our hope. And we know that we will be able to take this up within the work of our standing committee in Riga in a few weeks' time, and also, I'm sure, at the third part session at the end of June in Strasbourg. Some of these issues will again be discussed, and there will be follow-up to what we've been talking about here. It won't just be something that will be a lot of words, there will actually be actions. So I thank all of you for coming here. The big question, who found the fish?
Where is the fish?
Where is the fish? Where is the fish?
Some Swiss parliamentarians helped, some colleagues. It's all on the left side, exactly. It's there, strangely enough, in the rock, but apparently it lives there for more than 100 years and quite well. C'est quelque chose qui fonctionne toujours très bien lorsqu'on a des visites de classe.
That always works. When children come for visits here, we always tell them to find the fish. There's also a shadow over there that looks there's a kind of cloud up there that looks a bit like a fish. There might be a few fish, because when school children come, they always find lots of fish. We love having children here. They're always interested in the future. They're always interested in knowing what's going to happen next. And when they found the fish, they feel they have a real connection with what we're doing here, and that can only augur well for the future. So, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for coming here. Thank you all for having come to Bern. I thank all of our panelists also. You'll get a Swiss chocolate. If you haven't got one yet, you're going to get one. I'm also going to thank David Eads, who moderated our discussion so well. Let's give him a big hand. And thank you to our rapporteur also, who's done an excellent job of work. And thanks to all of those who've worked behind the scenes, the parliamentary services, the delegations, support staff, everyone who works behind the scenes, the people we don't see. They've done an awful lot of work to make sure that this could actually happen. Thanks also to the interpreters and to the translators who've worked with us. Thank you to everyone who supported us. Interpretation is certainly vital for conferences like this, so we're very glad to have had interpretation today. We also have two Swiss ambassadors. We have the gentleman who was the ambassador in Strasbourg until a few months ago, and also his successor. They're both with us. So thank you very much for being here today. We really appreciate having you here. Thank you to both of you. So, all that remains is for me to wish you all a very safe journey home. Before that, there's a lunch, which you get just downstairs. If you're interested in having lunch, if you have time to have lunch, you do have lunch. And then there's a visit to the Communications Museum in Bern afterwards, if you have time to stay for that. This museum actually got a Council of Europe prize, so it's a very good museum. And as David has said, tell people about what we did here. And we've got some wonderful photographs on the website. Use the photographs, let people know what we talked about, let people know about all of these issues. So I wish you all a very safe journey home, and I officially now declare this conference closed.